Hey there, and welcome to a world shaped by moonlit waters, shifting sands, and the echo of secrets older than time itself. Tonight, I'll be your guide, the Nile River, ancient and ever-flowing, inviting you to drift with me through the shadows and splendors of Egypt's divine rulers. Stay close, because before this journey ends, you'll uncover a chilling truth about the pharaohs that most never hear whispered in the desert wind. If you truly enjoy these immersive, soothing voyages into the past, consider liking and subscribing, so you'll always have a place to return to when you crave a calming story. And tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it as you settle in? Let's make this a gathering of history lovers from every corner of the world. Now, dim your lights, get cozy, and let the ancient currents carry you into the heart of Egypt. Picture the Nile at dusk, my waters shimmering beneath a sky streaked with gold and deep indigo. On my banks, the reeds whisper, palm trees sway, and in the distance, colossal monuments cast long shadows over the cool sand. This is the cradle of civilization, an endless stretch of life, death, and ambition, where everything begins and ends with me, the eternal river. 3,000 years before your world, Egypt rose from scattered tribes and restless dreams. Kingdoms grew along my fertile banks, their people learning to coax grain and life from the rich black soil left behind by my annual floods. It was here, in the embrace of these waters, that the first pharaohs emerged, men and women who believed themselves born of gods, destined to rule by divine design. The very first of them, a king named Nama, his name is sometimes remembered as Menes, dared to unite the feuding peoples of Upper and Lower Egypt. Imagine the spectacle, banners snapping in the desert wind, priests chanting prayers to ancient gods, and crowds gathered to witness the birth of a kingdom that would outlast the rise and fall of empires. With Name's victory, Egypt became one, a single powerful land where my waters flowed unbroken from the Mediterranean to the far reaches of Nubia. The pharaohs' rule shaped every inch of this world. Their word was law, their wishes sacred commands. Behind their wide, kohl-lined eyes and gilded crowns, they carried the burden of the cosmos itself. Every sunrise was a promise they had to keep, every harvest a testament to their power. The pharaoh was not only a king, but a living god. The flesh and blood incarnation of Horus, Vulcanite protector, and, upon death, Osiris, lord of eternity. Step into the bustling heart of Thebes or Memphis, and you'd see palaces rising above the river, their painted walls alive with scenes of conquest and ceremony. Priests moved through incense-filled corridors, servants hurried along mosaic floors, and the air was thick with the scent of lotus and myrrh. Overhead, banners fluttered, bearing the names of kings who believed their destinies were written in the stars. Yet beneath the shimmering surface of power and beauty, shadows lingered. The pharaoh's obsession with immortality ran deeper than my own currents. They raised pyramids so vast, they dwarfed the very mountains, carved tombs into cliffsides that vanished into darkness, and filled these sanctuaries with treasures meant to dazzle the gods themselves. Every statue, every intricate amulet, every painted hieroglyph was a ward against oblivion, a desperate attempt to secure a place in the next life. Their daily lives were woven from ritual and mystery. Every morning, the pharaoh greeted the sun god Ra, offering prayers and incense to ensure the world would not tumble into chaos. Priests anointed the ruler with sacred oils, draping him in linens so fine they gleamed like moonlight. In the echoing halls, scribes recorded his every decree, crafting a legacy meant to endure for eternity. But the perfection of their world was an illusion, one built upon strict hierarchies and relentless control. The bureaucracy that blossomed under the pharaoh's gaze was as intricate as a spider's web. Viziers, generals, and high priests jockeyed for favor, while artisans and farmers toiled endlessly to feed the insatiable hunger of the royal house. My floods brought fortune, but also fear, for a failed harvest could mean famine and unrest. At every turn, the Pharaohs' glory was shadowed by the possibility of disaster. Though their monuments still pierce the sky, it is the Pharaohs' darker obsessions that linger in the silent corridors of time. Their pursuit of purity led to marriages within the royal bloodline, mothers wedding sons, sisters joining brothers, all in the name of preserving divine essence. In the deep gloom of their tombs, loyal servants and beloved animals were sometimes entombed alive, destined to serve their master forever in the afterlife. Human sacrifice, rare but real, became the ultimate offering, a chilling testament to the Pharaoh's belief that even death itself could be commanded. As you listen to the river's story, can you sense the tension, the duality of light and shadow, divinity and mortality, woven into every stone and ritual? The Pharaohs strode the earth as gods, yet they were plagued by fear, jealousy, and the inescapable pull of death. Their legacy is a paradox: dazzling achievements born from obsession, and a darkness that haunts the golden sands. Over the course of our journey together, you'll meet legendary figures: Hatshepsut, who ruled as king in defiance of tradition; Akhenaten, who shattered the old gods for the love of a single son; the boy king Tutankhamun, whose tomb would astonish the world; and Ramses the Great, who carved his name into eternity. Their stories are tangled with magic, ambition, and the unending quest for immortality, each one revealing a new facet of Egypt's eternal mystery. So, let your thoughts drift now, as the Nile carries you deeper into the realm of the Pharaohs, a world where gold and shadow are never far apart, and every legend hides a darker truth. Reflect for a moment. What draws you to these ancient rulers? Is it the splendor, the power, or the secrets buried beneath their crowns? Keep those questions close as we step beyond the monuments and into the labyrinthine corridors of royal life. The night is young, and the mysteries of the Nile run deep. Let's begin by imagining a day in the life of a pharaoh at the height of the New Kingdom around 1500 BCE. Let me draw you into this day, as I, the Nile, watch the world awaken under the golden gaze of the sun. It's around 1500 years before your own calendar begins, deep in the heart of Egypt's New Kingdom. The first light of dawn spills across the polished limestone walls of the palace at Thebes, turning the city into a shimmering dream that floats above my waters. Even before the sun crests the horizon, the palace stirs with a kind of reverent anticipation. You can sense it in the gentle music drifting on the morning air. Blind musicians, their fingers dancing over lyres and flutes, serenading the awakening king. Their melodies mingle with the soft shuffle of servants' feet as they glide silently through shadowy halls, arms laden with platters of honey cakes, figs, and freshly baked bread, all prepared to break the royal fast. Step with me into the colonnaded courtyards, where the air is alive with the flutter of wings and the scent of blooming lotus. Songbirds dart through palm fronds and flowering acacia, while the palace gardens ripple with color: deep green papyrus, bursts of crimson hibiscus, and the delicate white of water lilies. Fountains murmur over polished stone, their cool spray catching the light, while tamed baboons, grooming each other with sleepy patience, and sleek lion cubs bask in the shade, completely unfazed by the bustle of human life around them. The palace itself is a living stage, every detail arranged to reinforce the majesty of its master. You watch as the pharaoh emerges from his private chambers, flanked by an entourage of body servants who have already spent an hour tending to his every need. His transformation each morning is a ritual as precise and sacred as any temple ceremony. His head and body are shaved until every trace of hair is gone, a defense against lice, but also a symbol of purity. His skin glows, slick with layers of perfumed oils, pressed from rare flowers and spices brought from far-off lands. The servants line his eyes with thick kohl and shimmering green malachite, crafting a gaze as sharp and mysterious as the falcon god Horus, whose power he claims as his own. Around his neck and wrists, gold and electrum flash in the pale morning light. Their surface is engraved with spells for protection and power. Atop his brow sits a crown, shaped like a falcon, its wings curling around his temples, a clear signal to all who see him that he is not merely mortal, but a living god walking the earth. Clothed in this dazzling armor of divinity, the pharaoh begins his day. But every movement, every gesture, is heavy with meaning. The first duty is always to the gods. He leads a solemn procession to the palace shrine, where incense coils through the air, and the painted faces of deities stare down in eternal stillness. Priests in spotless linen chant hymns and prayers, their voices weaving an unbroken link between earth and the heavens. The king kneels before the images of Re, lord of the sun, Osiris, ruler of the underworld, and the long line of his own deified ancestors, all watching, all waiting for his devotion. He pours offerings, sweet wine, fragrant oils, baskets of dates, onto the polished altars. Every drop, every grain, is an act of cosmic maintenance, a bargain to keep chaos at bay. The air is thick with the scent of myrrh and frankincense, and even I, the river itself, feel the weight of expectation pressing in. With the rituals complete, the pharaoh's attention turns from the gods to the burdens of human rule. He takes his seat on a throne of hammered gold, its legs carved with images of bound captives and crouching sphinxes. The vizier, trusted above all others, reads out the list of business for the day. There are boundary disputes to settle, farmers who squabble over the shifting lines of fields watered by my own floods. There are foreign envoys waiting in cool antechambers, eager to trade lapis lazuli and cedar wood for Egyptian grain. There are construction projects to approve, each one a monument meant to outlast the king himself. As he listens, the pharaoh's face reveals nothing. Those who stand before him know that, though he may ask for counsel, the final decision is his alone. His word is law, and his silence is as heavy as the desert night. The hours pass in a blur of spectacle and ceremony. Every gesture, every decree, is designed to reinforce the pharaoh's almost supernatural authority. You can feel the city tremble with excitement when the royal chariot rolls through the streets, painted wood gleaming, horses snorting under caparisons of gold. Crowds gather, pressing close for a glimpse of their living god. The cheers rise like the wind, and the pharaoh acknowledges them with gifts, coins, handfuls of grain, even amulets blessed by his touch. The people reach out, desperate for any scrap of favor, while the air vibrates with hope and awe. Later, he presides over the opening of a new temple. The ritual is ancient and precise. The king himself drives the first ceremonial peg into the earth, wielding a golden mallet. Priests circle him, chanting spells to bind the temple to the gods, sealing its sanctity. The moment is both public and private, a spectacle for the masses, yet also a deeply personal negotiation between king and cosmos. Every action is shadowed by an undercurrent of superstition. The pharaoh is careful to step into every room right foot first, a habit as ingrained as breathing. When he eats, he uses only his left hand, the right reserved for sacred acts. And, above all, he guards his shadow, making sure it never falls across a priest or a statue of a god. In the world of the pharaoh, even a shadow holds the power to offend the divine and bring calamity on the land. As the sun sinks toward the horizon, painting the sky in molten gold and violet, the pharaoh withdraws to his private quarters. For a brief moment, he allows himself a taste of relaxation, though even here, the weight of eternity is never far away. Dancers sway to the music of harps and lyres, their movements as fluid as my own waters. The king sips date wine from a goblet that glows with inlaid turquoise and lapis, the cool liquid a brief respite from the day's burdens. Advisors gather around him, discussing theology and philosophy, the nature of the soul, and the mysteries of the afterlife. Yet, for all the comfort and splendor, a chill lingers in the air, the knowledge that every pleasure is fleeting, every joy a shadow, compared to the endless life he seeks in the field of reeds. It is this obsession with eternity that shapes every decision the pharaoh makes. Even as he enjoys the pleasures of the living, his mind is haunted by visions of his own tomb, a secret palace carved deep beneath the hills west of Thebes, where he will one day rule forever among the silent dead. The Valley of the Kings is a city of ghosts and dreams, and I have watched as its tunnels fill, year after year, with treasures and curses meant to cheat death. But before he can step into eternity, the pharaoh must survive the minefield of palace intrigue. Here, within the gilded walls of the royal household, the stakes are higher than anywhere else. From the moment he takes the throne, the king's most urgent task is to secure the succession. Yet, the royal family is a tangled garden where bloodlines twist in on themselves, growing ever more knotted with each generation. In the pursuit of purity and power, pharaohs marry their sisters, their daughters, even their mothers. The result is a house seething with jealousy, ambition, and betrayal. Just beyond the king's hearing, whispers swirl like sandstorms. The great royal wife, herself often a half-sister, schemes with priests and courtiers to ensure her own son inherits the throne, even if it means outmaneuvering an older half-brother. Every child, every wife, is a potential rival or pawn. The annals of Egyptian history are littered with tales of poisonings, sudden deaths, and disappearances that no one dares to question aloud. I remember the story of Hatshepsut, a queen who rose above them all, originally just a regent for her stepson, Thutmose III. She claimed kingship for herself, adopting the very symbols of male power, false beard, broad-shouldered statues, and all. Her reign lasted more than 20 years, a testament to her cunning and will. And then there's Akhenaten, a king whose devotion to the sun disk, Aten, shattered centuries of tradition. He changed his own name, abandoned the old capital, and waged war against the priests of Amun, plunging the court into chaos. The palace became a theater of suspicion and fear, where even the closest relatives could become enemies overnight. When Akhenaten died, his son Tutankhamun, just a child, was left to restore order, picking through the ruins of a shattered faith. Yet all of this drama, all of these human flaws, pale beside the darkest rituals the pharaohs once commanded. In the earliest dynasties, I saw the ground soaked with the blood of retainer sacrifices. When a king died, dozens of servants, sometimes more, were killed so they could serve him in the afterlife. Archaeologists have uncovered tombs where the bodies of young men and women lie arranged in perfect rows beside their master, their lives snuffed out to ensure his comfort beyond death. Some rulers, like Jer, even took beloved pets and piles of human hair, trophies and tokens of their power, into eternity with them. The edges of the pharaoh's glory are always stained with the memory of these sacrifices. Over time, as Egypt's beliefs evolved, this practice faded, replaced by more symbolic means. But the shadow it casts still lingers, a reminder of the chasm that separated the king from those who served him. As the centuries unfurl, I watch the parade of pharaohs leave their marks along my banks and in the stones that rise from my floodplains. Ramses II, Ramses the Great, stands out among them, presiding over Egypt at the peak of her might. His colossal statues and temple walls shout his victories and loves to the ages, each carving a carefully crafted story of divine power. Then there's Cleopatra VII, navigating the treacherous waters of foreign alliances and Roman ambition, her intelligence and charisma making her both a legend and a target. These rulers, each so different, yet all drunk on the promise of immortality, shape the world around them, even as they are shaped by it. But perhaps none has seized the world's imagination quite like Tutankhamun, the boy king, whose tomb was hidden from grave robbers for over 3,000 years. I remember the day Howard Carter broke the seal in 1922, unleashing a wave of wonder that swept the globe. The treasures inside, golden masks, nested coffins, beds carved to resemble divine animals, offered a mirror into the mind of a people obsessed with death and the afterlife. In the flicker of the torchlight, the world caught a glimpse of the Pharaohs' dazzling, disturbing world. Modern science has peeled back even more layers of the mystery. CT scans and DNA studies have exposed the inbred defects that haunted Tutankhamun's family, along with festering wounds and evidence of malaria that may have ended his life before he reached 20. Ancient scrolls and inscriptions reveal even more about the cutthroat games played within the palace walls. Foreign wives vying for favor, ambitious viziers plotting in the shadows, and the ever-present threat of betrayal. The closer you look, the more the legend of the Pharaohs becomes. A tangle of beauty and horror, devotion and cruelty. Yet, for all the unease these revelations might bring, the fascination endures. The Pharaohs continue to dazzle and disturb, their monuments standing as both warning and invitation. Across more than 3,000 years, they ruled a civilization that gave the world wonders in stone and science, geometry, medicine, poetry, and art that still stirs the soul. Their faces, immortalized in smooth limestone or hammered gold, gaze out at us from the past, calling us to reflect on the nature of power, the price of immortality, and the mystery of what it means to be both God and mortal. So, next time you find yourself tracing the enigmatic smile of the Sphinx, or marveling at the gleam of Tutankhamun's death mask, remember the shadows that flicker just beyond the torchlight. The Pharaohs wielded unimaginable authority, yet they lived every moment in the grip of fear and longing, for eternity, for order, for an escape from the oblivion that claims all mortals. Their legacy is a story of brilliance and brutality, splendor and sacrifice, echoing across the ages in every block of stone and every whispered tale. And as I, the Nile, carry their secrets onward, the story is still not finished. The next chapter awaits, where we'll explore how the Pharaoh's obsession with grandeur and eternal life has left behind mysteries that continue to haunt and inspire us. As we've seen, the Pharaohs of ancient Egypt lived lives of opulence and grandeur, almost unimaginable today. But what does their legacy truly mean? And why does it still capture our imagination? Let's wade deeper into the river of memory and uncover the enduring mysteries these ancient kings left behind. Step with me now through the hush of twilight, where the desert's edge bleeds into my ancient waters. Here in Egypt, I've seen the rise and fall of kings, watched palaces gleam and crumble, felt the echo of drums and whispered prayers along my banks. The Pharaohs, those living gods, built their world on my flood and my silence. Their splendor dazzled like the midday sun, but beneath the gold and worship, shadows always crept, hungry and cold. No pharaoh captured these contradictions, quite like Ramses II, the one history would call Ramses the Great. I remember when he first claimed the double crown. The year was 1279 before your reckoning, and the world seemed to tremble at his command. For 66 long years, his shadow stretched across the land, longer than most men's dreams, let alone their reigns. The cities along my banks flourished, and grain spilled from the storehouses. Yet everywhere, Ramses's hunger for immortality left its mark. He raised temples vast enough to swallow the sky, carved obelisks that pointed like accusing fingers at the heavens. At Abu Simbel, his likeness stares out over the sand, colossal and imperious, daring time itself to erase it. Statues of his face, frozen in serene arrogance, towered over his subjects, each one a stone-bound promise that his name would never fade. I watched as his masons, priests, and slaves toiled beneath a sun that showed no mercy, sweating and bleeding to shape his monuments. The air buzzed with the sound of chisels, the dust of eternity swirling in the light. But Ramses's thirst for glory was never quenched. He fathered 100 children, each one a living testament to his ambition. His harem was a world unto itself, filled with queens, concubines, and attendants, a labyrinth of politics and longing. In his quest to erase rivals, he ordered the names of past kings hacked from temple walls, their faces scratched away, so only his own might endure. I remember the stones weeping as their histories were stolen, the gods themselves unsettled by such audacity. And when it came to the afterlife, Ramses's obsessions grew even darker. The Ramesseum, his funerary temple, sprawled on my west bank like a city of the dead. Generations of artisans shaped its walls, inscribing every inch with hymns and victories, while hidden storehouses overflowed with riches, chariots inlaid with gold, alabaster jars so fine they glowed in the candlelight, and furniture fit for an immortal king. He ordered his favorite lion mummified, the great beast's silent form meant to guard him through eternity. Yet the treasures were only part of his preparation. When Ramses's time came, the air in Thebes turned heavy with incense and fear. Recent discoveries beneath the dust reveal a chilling truth. Many in his household, servants, musicians, even beloved concubines, were ritually slain, their bodies arranged in eternal service beside their master. Some still clutched jars and trays, as if they might be summoned at any moment, trapped forever in the Pharaohs' afterlife. Their faces, preserved in death, hinted both devotion and dread, a testament to the price of serving a living god. This was the legacy Ramses left behind. Temples of awe, yes, but also tombs of terror. The blood and sweat of the common folk soaked into my soil, their labor shaping the king's glory, while they themselves remained nameless and forgotten. Ramses's story is not unique. I remember Amenhotep III, who raised palaces as if he were building a heaven on earth, and Akhenaten, who dared to shatter the order of the gods for the sake of his own vision. Even the boy king, Tutankhamun, was sealed in his tomb with gold piled higher than a man's head, each treasure a ward against oblivion. And who could forget Cleopatra, the last to call herself Pharaoh? Her path to the throne was paved with the bodies of her own kin, sacrificed so she might rule alone. Again and again, these rulers proved that divinity, once claimed, placed them above the laws binding ordinary mortals. They rewrote prayers, seized what they desired, and declared their whims sacred. They took lovers without count, enslaved thousands, and, when it suited their needs, demanded ritual death to serve their journey into the next world. The promise of eternal life made their excesses not only permissible, but inevitable. Each act of hubris fed the myth that they might outwit mortality itself. But I, the Nile, have watched every king succumb in the end. For all their priests and spells, for all the gold heaped in their tombs, they could not turn back the tide. Death came for them, as surely as it comes for the humblest fisherman on my shore. Their bodies, swaddled in linen and resin, were left in the dark, mute relics of ambition, while their mighty empires withered and vanished beneath the desert wind. There is a lesson here, as old as my current and as sharp as the falcon's cry at dawn. Power, however dazzling, is never permanent. The Pharaoh's arrogance echoes in every age, a warning to those who believe themselves above the reach of fate. Even today, as you ponder these tales of gilded splendor and cruelty, consider how easily greatness can topple into ruin. The mighty and the meek are leveled alike by time. So as you drift deeper into this world of sun-baked stones and whispering reeds, let your mind linger on the paradox of these rulers, divine and doomed, magnificent and monstrous. We have dug up their treasures and pieced together their secrets, yet so much remains hidden beneath my silt, waiting for a braver hand to unearth it. What else have I seen that you have yet to discover? What shadows still cling to the bones of god-kings, far beneath the valley's silent cliffs? Their legacy is written both in the wonders they left behind and in the darkness that clings to their memory. They haunt your imagination still, golden, ruthless, and unforgettable. Their stories are dust now, but their warning is eternal. Even the gods must bow before the river of time. And as night deepens across my waters, I invite you to reflect on the strange, hypnotic pull these ancient rulers hold over us. We are both drawn to their glory and unsettled by their cruelty. Perhaps that's what keeps us searching, digging and dreaming, hoping to understand the souls behind the masks of gold. Now, let your gaze drift across the dawn-lit banks, where the world stirs once again. The next morning would see the pharaoh embark on his daily routine of religious duties and governing. But even in the rhythm of a single day, the tension between divinity and mortality would shape every breath, every word, every ritual performed beneath the rising sun. As the first blush of dawn spills across the eastern horizon, I, the Nile, have watched the palace stir to life for thousands of years. Listen to the hush before the sun breaks fully over the palm-fringed banks. Even the birds seem to hold their breath, sensing that the pharaoh, living god of Egypt, is about to rise and set the rhythm for a nation. You, standing in the shadow of those ancient columns, can almost feel the weight of anticipation in the cool morning air. It is not simply another day, it is a fresh chapter in the unending performance where the divine must merge with the mundane. Inside the palace, the pharaoh does not awaken like ordinary men. His first moments are attended by soft-footed servants who enter with bowls of sacred water drawn from my own depths, the Nile's gift purified by ritual. Priests, draped in immaculate white linen, approach with solemn faces, ready to perform the purification that will cleanse both flesh and soul. The water runs cool over his skin, tracing the lines of a body seen as the axis between heaven and earth. Every drop is a prayer, every gesture a safeguard against chaos. As I glide past the city's edge, I've seen the same scene play out across dynasties. The pharaoh, now ritually clean, is clothed by attendants in the finest linen, fabric so light it seems spun from sunlight itself. The air shimmers with the fragrance of imported perfumes, their scents floating above the ever-present musk of incense. Each piece of regalia carries its own gravity. The double crown sits heavy atop his brow, uniting Upper and Lower Egypt in a single, visible promise. The crook rests in his right hand, its curved head a symbol of shepherding his people. The flail, sharp and severe, is a reminder that mercy and punishment must walk hand in hand. But none of this is for show. The pharaoh's every movement is dictated by Ma'at, the cosmic order I have witnessed since the world's first morning. Rules govern even the smallest gesture, as if the universe itself will unravel if he lifts a hand too quickly or utters a word out of place. Imagine the pressure, the knowledge that you, alone, hold the balance between harmony and disaster. The palace is beautiful, but its walls are thick with expectation. Once robed in his full glory, the pharaoh steps into the world beyond his private chambers. Sunlight floods the open courtyard, catching on golden jewelry and lapis inlays that gleam like pieces of sky. The procession begins. Priests, courtiers, and guards fall in behind him, a living river of humanity flowing toward the temple. I, the Nile, see this daily march as a kind of heartbeat, steady, essential, yet always edged with a sense of peril. The temple looms, cool and shadowed, its columns painted with scenes of gods and kings. Here the pharaoh stands not as a man, but as the high priest of every god in Egypt. He approaches the sanctuary, and the air thickens with the scent of burning myrrh and cedar. Offerings are placed on altars, bread, wine, sweet-smelling oils, and small statuettes carved in his own image. The priests begin their chants, voices rising and falling like the wind through reeds along my banks. The pharaoh himself recites sacred spells, his voice strong, but tinged with strain. Each word must be perfect, each gesture exact, for the gods are watching. Can you imagine the weight of such ritual? One misstep, and cosmic order could shatter. The pyramid texts etched in tombs are not just stories. They are instruction manuals for both life and death, guiding the pharaoh through the perils of this world and the next. Sometimes, as I drift past palace walls, I sense the anxiety behind the pharaoh's composed expression. To maintain Ma'at is to carry an invisible burden, one that never lightens, not even for a living god. Once the last hymn has faded into silence, the pharaoh's day turns to the affairs of state. His viziers, wise men chosen for their loyalty and cunning, approach with scrolls and whispered reports. They bring news from every corner of Egypt, harvests along my banks, skirmishes with the Nubians to the south, uneasy peace with the Hittites to the north. The pharaoh's gaze moves from face to face, weighing each word, seeking hidden motives. He listens to petitions from his people, judgments hanging on his every breath. Justice is dispensed in the name of Ma'at, but in truth, the pharaoh's will is law. Yet, absolute power breathes shadows. I have seen the darkness that comes with unchecked authority. Some pharaohs, intoxicated by their own divinity, imposed crushing taxes and conscripted thousands to haul stone for monuments that would outlast their names. Others, their hearts twisted by suspicion, turned on their own kin. The story of Thutmose IV still ripples along my waters. A ruler who ordered the deaths of his own mother and brother, snuffing out rivals before they could even whisper of rebellion. In these halls, where gold glitters and laughter echoes, the air is never free of tension. Blood ties are often just another strand in the web of power. But the day is not only filled with duty and dread. There are moments when the pharaoh embraces the pleasures reserved for gods and kings. He may climb into his war chariot, the wheels rattling over packed earth, bow in hand as he races after lions and gazelles in the desert. The hunt is more than a sport. It is a ritualized battle against chaos itself. Each arrow that finds its mark reassures Egypt that order prevails, at least for today. Sometimes, beneath the dappled shade of palace gardens, the pharaoh selects a favored courtier and sits down to a game of senet. The board is laid out with carved pieces, each move a reenactment of the soul's journey through the underworld. The stakes are high, even in play, for some believe that victory in Sene ensures smooth passage into the field of reeds, the afterlife paradise promised to those who uphold Ma'at. Here again, the line between leisure and cosmic significance blurs, until it is impossible to tell where one ends and the other begins. As my waters cool in the afternoon sun, the palace comes alive with another sort of pageantry. Musicians tune their lyres, dancers twist and spin, and acrobats leap through the air like swallows. The pharaoh reclines on a gilded couch, a goblet of wine in hand, surrounded by family and favored courtiers. Servants move quietly, fanning away flies and offering delicacies, honeyed cakes, figs, roasted duck, and the freshest produce from palace gardens irrigated by my own floods. Every meal is a feast, every bite a reminder of the bounty I bring. Yet the conversation is never far from matters of succession, alliance, and the ever-present threat of betrayal. Sometimes, when the heat grows oppressive, the pharaoh finds relief in water. He might swim in a private pool, its surface reflecting the hieroglyphs carved into nearby columns, or he might step onto a royal barge. The boat rocks gently as it glides along my surface, canopies fluttering in the breeze, oarsmen chanting softly. On these excursions, the pharaoh is surrounded by laughter and song. But even here, the rituals of power and protection persist. Amulets hang from the bow, spells are recited against the lurking spirits who might rise from my depths. Leisure is never free from the shadow of the sacred. As the sun tips westward and the light grows soft, the pharaoh's responsibilities shift. He must preside over ceremonies marking the agricultural calendar, festivals celebrating the inundation, the planting, the first harvest. Each rite is an echo of the creation myths, woven into every current of my being. The Pharaoh offers thanks for my annual flooding, recognizing that my generosity sustains both his people and his own claim to divinity. Evening falls, and the palace grows quieter. The Pharaoh withdraws to his private chambers, but his obligations do not end. Now comes the time for royal family, the great wife, concubines, and children. There are expectations here too. The production of heirs, the display of harmony within the royal household, the careful management of jealousies and ambitions that simmer just beneath the surface. I, the Nile, have seen love and hatred twist together in these rooms, as tender moments give way to whispered threats and secret plots. Night deepens, and the Pharaoh prepares for rest. Yet sleep is not a simple escape for him. It is another threshold, another world where the living god must face dreams, filled with omens, warnings, and the voices of the dead. Magic spells are carved into headrests and inscribed on bed frames to guard against the dangers that prowl. The borderland between waking and sleeping. In the darkness, the Pharaoh's bar soul is said to join the sun god's nightly voyage through the underworld, fighting off serpents and chaos, to ensure that both king and cosmos will rise again with the dawn. Not all dreams are gentle. The tale of Ramses II lingers in the humid air, a night when he dreamed of the creator god, Ptah, standing over him, furious and armed with a sword. The god's rebuke left a mark, a pain in the side that would not fade until Ramses rushed to finish the temple he had neglected. Even in dreams, there is no refuge from the demands of divinity. The mind of the Pharaoh is a haunted landscape, as full of peril as the deserts beyond my banks. As the palace settles into stillness, the Pharaoh's humanity emerges, naked and vulnerable, beneath layers of gold and ritual. In these silent hours, he is no longer the living Horus, but a man, tired, anxious, his heart beating as frail and uncertain as any other's. The river's song outside his window is a lullaby and a warning, reminding him that tomorrow the wheel will turn again, and the performance must begin anew. All through the day, from the first ritual cleansing to the last anxious dream, the Pharaoh walks a tightrope stretched between the splendor of godhood and the brutality of power. Every act, whether sacred or ordinary, is soaked in significance. His life is a pageant of dazzling achievement and deep, disturbing shadows, a paradox that I, the Nile, have carried for centuries. Now, as you linger in the fading light, ask yourself, what would it feel like to live each day at the knife edge of divinity and doom? Would the glory outweigh the fear? Or would the burden of absolute power break even the strongest soul? The legacy of the Pharaohs lingers not just in monuments and myths, but in these eternal questions that ripple through time. But as night settles and the palace grows quiet, you sense that the greatest dramas are not played out in ceremony or on the battlefield, but within the tangled web of royal relationships, secret rivalries, and the desperate struggle for succession. The next day's dawn will find these bonds tested, ambitions revealed, and the fate of Egypt hanging in the balance. Let me carry you now into the secret heart of Egypt's royal court, a place as dazzling as the midday sun on my waters, but every bit as treacherous as the shifting reeds along my banks. Imagine the palace, gleaming with gold and echoing with whispered secrets, where every glance and gesture could change the course of a dynasty. Here, the Pharaoh sits at the center, a living god in human flesh. But even he is never truly alone. All around him swirl courtiers, priests, ambitious officials, and, most dangerously, his own family, each orbiting his power like restless moons, hungry for a taste of eternity. If you think today's royal families and reality shows are dramatic, just wait until you hear what I've witnessed flowing past these palace walls. In the royal household, love and loyalty are always tangled up with envy, ambition, and betrayal. And the women who share the Pharaoh's world, they aren't just ornaments or shadows in the background. They are queens, priestesses, mothers, and master strategists, wielding influence that can rival or even surpass the king himself. Let's drift first to the great royal wife, the Pharaoh's chief queen, whose role was both privilege and peril. She was meant to be his beloved partner, sharing the weight of Egypt's crown, but in reality, her position was never secure. The palace teemed with rival wives and concubines, each one plotting to see her own son wear the double crown. Some queens, though, managed to turn this dangerous game to their advantage, none more famously than Nefertiti and Hatshepsut. Picture Nefertiti, gliding through the sunlit courtyards as the favored queen of Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who dared to upend Egypt's ancient faith. Nefertiti's beauty was legendary, but her power went far deeper than her famous face. There are whispers in the papyrus reeds that she ruled as Akhenaten's equal, perhaps even as a pharaoh in her own right, during the turbulent years of the Amarna period. Then, as suddenly as a desert mirage, she vanished from the historical record. Did she die in obscurity, or did she seize the throne herself, hidden behind a shrouded royal name? The truth still lies buried beneath stone and sand, a secret I alone remember as I flow past the crumbling ruins of Akhenaten. And then there's Hatshepsut. Her story is nothing short of astonishing. Born a royal daughter, married to her half-brother and mother to the next in line, she was perfectly placed when fate handed her the regency, as her young stepson, Thutmose III, inherited the throne. But Hatshepsut was no mere caretaker. She claimed the full titles and regalia of kingship, even dropping the feminine endings from her name. For over 20 years, Egypt bowed to a female pharaoh, her statues carved with the beard and crown of a king. Under her rule, the kingdom blossomed, temples rose, trade flourished, and her memory was etched into stone. Yet shadows lingered. Only after her death did Thutmose III step out from beneath her formidable legacy, and later he tried to erase her name from history. But I, the Nile, remember every reflection of her in my waters. Of course, for every queen who triumphed, there were others who found themselves trapped in a web of rivalry and suspicion. In a royal household where polygamy was the norm, the battle for the pharaoh's favor and for the future throne was relentless. Take the infamous feud between Ramses II's chief queen, Nefertari, and the secondary wife, Isetnofret, mother of the heir apparent. Their rivalry was the talk of the palace, a drama played out across lavish banquets and secret messages scrawled on temple walls. Each woman schemed to secure her son's claim, using every weapon at her disposal: charm, alliances, gifts, and even slander. In the end, Isetnofret's son, Merneptah, would claim the throne, but not before decades of intrigue and heartache. Their story could fill a season of any modern soap opera, and yet it was only one chapter in the endless struggle for power. As you wade deeper into these royal waters, you come face to face with one of the most disturbing traditions of all: royal incest. To the ancient Egyptians, the blood of the pharaoh was divine, a living link to the gods themselves. To keep that blood pure, kings often married their own sisters, daughters, or even mothers. It's a custom that might shock you, but for them, it was the only way to preserve the sacred lineage. The Ptolemaic dynasty, which ruled long after the pyramids were built, took this to almost absurd extremes. Their family tree twists in on itself, with generation after generation of brother-sister marriages. Cleopatra VII, whose name still echoes along my banks, was the product of at least 3 generations of such unions. Her family seemed determined to outdo themselves, with uncle-niece marriages and even double-sibling matches, turning the royal bloodline into a labyrinth. But incest wasn't just a Ptolemaic obsession. It reached back to the very dawn of Egyptian kingship, echoing the myth of Osiris and Isis, brother and sister, husband and wife. By imitating the gods, the pharaohs hoped to maintain the cosmic order. Yet, as I have seen, such unions came at a price. Tutankhamun, the boy king whose tomb still glimmers in the Valley of the Kings, was born of a brother-sister marriage. His frail body, with its clubbed foot and cleft palate, bears silent witness to the hidden costs of royal purity. But in those days, the fear of impure blood outweighed any concern for genetic health. Incest was less a scandal than a sacred duty. If the rivalry between queens was fierce, the struggle among royal children could be downright deadly. Unlike in some kingdoms, Egypt did not always follow strict rules of primogeniture. Any son, or even a daughter, could potentially claim the throne, and that uncertainty bred chaos. Ambitious princes and princesses, their mothers whispering in their ears, plotted in shadowy corridors and moonlit gardens, each dreaming of wearing the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt. One of the most chilling stories I can share is that of Amenemhat I, founder of the powerful 12th dynasty. Once an advisor, he seized the throne through a calculated coup, but the crown brought him no peace. His reign was haunted by conspiracy after conspiracy, as rival factions sought to unseat him. The danger grew so severe that even his own harem, those closest to him, tried to take his life. The night they crept into his bedchamber, daggers drawn, he was saved only by the quick action of his loyal guards. Imagine the terror of that moment. A king, nearly naked, fighting for his life in the flickering torchlight. Shaken to his core, Amenemhat took the extraordinary step of crowning his son, Senusret I, as co-ruler, while he still lived. This bold move was meant to secure the succession and dampen the fires of ambition that burned all around him. The advice he left to his son, carved into stone, is laced with hard-won cynicism. Trust no one, for you may never know who waits in the shadows. But even these warnings were sometimes not enough. The most harrowing example of royal rivalry gone awry is the grim end of Ramses III, the last great pharaoh of the New Kingdom. In his later years, the court split into rival factions, each wife plotting to make her son the next king. The palace, once a place of splendor, became a nest of vipers. One wife, Tiye, hatched a plot so daring it still chills the air around her tomb. She and her allies planned to murder Ramses and place her son Pentau on the throne. The conspiracy unraveled at the last moment, but not before violence erupted inside the palace walls. In the chaos, Ramses's own throat was cut, most likely by an assassin who slipped past the guards, blending into the shadows of the harem. The king lingered just long enough to name an heir and order the execution of the conspirators. The fate of the guilty was brutal: forced suicides and a denied burial for Pentau, his name scratched out from the scrolls of eternity. Even in death, the struggle for power left scars that no amount of ritual could heal. Such stories of queens who ruled like kings, of brothers and sisters bound by both love and law, of sons who waited with daggers in the dark, are not just the stuff of legend. They are the true beating heart of Egypt's royal history, as tangled and mesmerizing as my own winding course. The pharaoh's world was one of dazzling splendor, but it was always haunted by shadows. Every banquet, every festival, every stroll through the palace gardens might be the prelude to betrayal. No one, not even the living God in human form, could ever truly rest easy. As I have watched these dramas unfold age after age, I invite you to reflect: what would you risk for power? What lines would you cross if you believed the gods had chosen your blood? The pharaoh wore the double crown, but the weight of Egypt's destiny pressed harder than any golden diadem. In the end, even the mightiest king was as vulnerable as any mortal, caught in the eternal dance of ambition and fate. And yet, through it all, the pharaoh's divine image endured, shimmering above the turmoil like the midday sun on my surface. But what did it truly mean to be a god on earth? In our next chapter, we'll step into the dazzling, sacred realm of kingship and legacy. where the pharaoh's humanity and divinity collided on the grandest stage of all. Imagine yourself gliding along my waters, under a sky brushed with gold, the life of ancient Egypt unfurling on either bank. Through the hush of morning mist, you see the silhouette of the pharaoh rising above the land, no ordinary man or woman, but a living god, a bridge between earth and sky. I, the Nile, have watched the pharaohs ascend, rule and fall, each one cloaked in both splendor and shadow. To their people, these rulers were not just sovereigns, but the very embodiment of Horus, the falcon whose eyes see all, and the cherished offspring of Ra, the blazing sun. Every heartbeat of Egypt pulsed with the belief that their king was divine and eternal, destined to guide the world's order as surely as I carry water to the desert's edge. But walk a little closer with me, wading into the secrets of their reign, and the awe mingles with unease. For the pharaoh's divinity did not simply elevate him above his subjects. It demanded a price, one paid in blood and devotion, in gold and grief. One of the most chilling customs I have witnessed, as old as the first stones stacked at Abydos, was retainer sacrifice. The idea was simple, yet staggering. Those who had served the pharaoh in life, trusted advisors, loyal servants, beloved animals, would continue their service in death. They were buried alive or killed at the moment of their king's passing, meant to walk beside him through the shadowed halls of the afterlife. To the ancient Egyptians, this was the highest honor. To modern eyes, it is a shiver running down the spine, a reminder of how far the living would go to secure the comfort of a god-king's soul. I remember the royal necropolis at Abydos, where the earliest dynasties pressed the sand with their grandeur. Around each tomb, smaller graves appeared like satellites orbiting a dark sun. Here the bodies of servants, there the tools of daily life. Everywhere the tokens of a world determined not to let their pharaoh walk alone into eternity. Take the tomb of King Jer, for example. The sand there still whispers of the day excavators uncovered 318 subsidiary graves, each servant laid out in precise, silent rows. These were not haphazard burials, but a calculated, chilling exhibition of loyalty and power. The king's reach extended beyond the grave, his command echoing even in the afterlife. Picture the scene: priests chanting, mourners weeping, and in the background the quiet, inevitable procession of those chosen to follow their master into darkness. And it was not only humans who paid this price. The royal tombs sheltered more than bones and gold. They hid the remains of animals, each one cherished in life and sacrificed in death. I have seen hunting dogs laid at their master's feet, cats curled eternally at the pharaoh's side, monkeys and gazelles arranged with unsettling care. The tomb of King Hor, for instance, contained 10 donkeys, beasts of burden, who had carried funeral offerings, now stilled forever in devotion. King Nama's resting place boasted 10 dogs, while King Waji's grave held the sacred forms of 12 baboons, their faces frozen in a perpetual watch, guardians for all time. To the Egyptians, each animal carried its own magic, its own role in the intricate drama of the afterlife. But sometimes, the offerings took an even stranger form. Deep beneath the temple of Anubis at Saqqara, I have watched archaeologists' lanterns flicker over a site, both wondrous and horrific, catacombs packed with mummified animals, and something even more unsettling, piles upon piles of human hair. 30 million animal mummies, 80 tons of hair, all amassed as tribute to the jackal-headed god of embalming. This hair, shorn from the heads of servants, was believed to carry prayers and pleas for the pharaoh's safe passage, an offering as intimate as it was macabre. Imagine the ritual: a lock of hair, cut with trembling hands, laid at the feet of a god, a silent hope that the king's soul might find favor beyond the veil. Yet, for all these chilling displays, human sacrifice was not a constant note in Egypt's long, winding song. The darkest rites faded as centuries passed, replaced by a new kind of magic. By the time the New Kingdom dawned, The pharaohs had abandoned the spilling of blood for more symbolic substitutes. Instead of living servants, they buried Shabti figurines, small painted workers crafted from wood, stone, or clay, each one inscribed with a promise to serve their master in the next world. The pharaoh's retinue was now made of art and incantation, rather than flesh and bone. But even as the rites softened, the underlying message remained. The king's needs came above all else, in life and in death. Still, the old graves linger. If you listen, you can almost hear the silence pressing in those tombs, the ghostly presence of all who went unwillingly to eternity. These burial grounds speak of absolute power, a world where one man's comfort justified any cost, where the pharaoh's divine status meant his journey to the afterlife outweighed countless other lives. The inscription of the 6th dynasty courtier, Weni the Elder, rings in my memory. He describes his duty with pride, recounting how he brought the pharaoh's sarcophagus and the precious pyramidion, ensuring every detail was perfect, every expense justified. The royal tomb was a project without limits, a monument to the idea that one life could shape the destiny of the many. But not every pharaoh clung to the darkest customs. In my flowing centuries, I have seen even gods rebel. Akhenaten, the heretic king, shattered tradition by worshipping a single god, the Aten, the sun disk blazing overhead. He moved his capital to Akhetaten, today known as Amarna, and built a royal tomb empty of subsidiary graves. Here was a brief radical departure, no retainer sacrifices, no grim galleries of the dead. For a moment, Egypt's rituals matched its new theology, the king's afterlife supplied by faith rather than flesh. Yet, like all revolutions, this one was fleeting. After Akhenaten's death, his son Tutankhamun restored the old gods and the old ways. When Tutankhamun's tomb was opened in 1922, its treasures stunned the world, but so did the discovery of his several stillborn daughters, mummified and entombed beside him. No longer sacrificed, these children nonetheless accompanied their father into eternity, a testament to the enduring belief in divine blood and the heavy cost of royal lineage. As the centuries rolled on, Egypt's rituals grew ever more elaborate. Mummification became a sacred science, a way to cheat decay and guarantee immortality. Pharaohs like Seti I and Ramses II found rest in tombs as complex as labyrinths, hidden away in the Valley of the Kings, their walls painted with spells and stories, their chambers overflowing with gold, chariots, delicacies, and dreams. Their servants, now made of wood and stone, still stood ready to answer their master's call at a single word uttered in the afterlife. The hope was always the same, to live forever as a god among gods, to bend the rules of mortality just a little further. This haunting obsession, this belief that the pharaoh could command eternity, is their most enduring legacy. Long after their tombs were cracked open by thieves or time, long after their mummies were scattered or hidden, the pharaohs remain. In museums and books, in the echo of their names, Khufu, Nefertiti, Hatshepsut, Tutankhamun, the past comes alive. Their monuments rise against the sky, defiant and eternal, and we gaze up at them in awe, wondering at the power that could build such wonders and the darkness that often accompanied it. They wanted to live forever, and in a way, they have. But not as they envisioned. Their immortality rests not in their bodies, but in the stories we tell, the questions we ask, the fascination that refuses to fade. For the mighty, the afterlife was a birthright, assured by divine parentage and sealed with ritual. For the common people, eternity had to be earned, through service, through sacrifice, through hope. This chasm between god-kings and everyone else shaped every facet of their world, dazzling in its ambition and alien in its brutality. With a word, a pharaoh could command mountains to move, rivers to shift, lives to be surrendered. Yet with every act of power, The distance between ruler and ruled became more profound. The loneliness of divinity edged deeper into the stones of their tombs. And yet, as I have flowed on, I have seen that even the sun's children could not escape the limits of flesh. Their bodies ached, their hearts broke, their families schemed and quarreled. They caught fevers, suffered wounds, mourned lost children. Their power was immense, but their humanity was inescapable. When you look at the gold masks and the soaring pyramids, remember the people beneath. The pharaohs were at once untouchable gods and vulnerable human beings, living their lives in the shadow of their own immortality. Perhaps this is why their world still draws you in, why you find yourself returning to these sunlit ruins and shadowed corridors. The paradox calls out: gods who doubted, giants who wept. They built their stories into stone and sand, hoping to outlast the centuries. But what really endures is their humanity, hidden just beneath the surface of divinity. They loved, they lost, and they longed, just as you do. The ancient Egyptians believed that to speak the name of the dead was to let them live again. So every time you whisper Khufu, Nefertiti, Hatshepsut, or Tutankhamun, you are part of their afterlife. Their names ripple across my waters, carried on the wind, written in memory and wonder. They designed their tombs and pyramids to last until the end of days. And in doing so, they became part of history's bedrock, forever etched in the human heart. Even now, as you listen, the world of the pharaohs comes alive. Their power, their beauty, their cruelty, and their grace remain with you, as vivid as the paint on their ancient tomb walls. So let us lay them to rest once more, as they were laid to rest so long ago, with awe, with reverence, and with the gentle murmur of their names echoing down through the ages. Sleep well, sun kings and queens of my waters. May your spirit endure, may your soul take flight, and may your stories be told for all time. Thank you for drifting with me through this chapter of ancient splendor and shadow. As the sun dips and the lotus blooms close for the night, may the peace of the pharaohs settle over your dreams. But do not stray far. The next part of our journey awaits, where you will see the true magnitude of the power, the excess, and the undying mystery that still clings to the memory of Egypt's greatest rulers. Let us flow onward and see what more the ages hold. Come closer and listen to the flow of memory that only I, the Nile, can carry. Through my waters, I have seen the rise and fall of every pharaoh, their glory and their ruin reflected on my surface, their secrets drifting beneath. The story of the ancient Egyptian kings is one of dazzling magnificence, but also of darkness, a paradox of godlike power and all too human frailty. Walk with me now along the banks of time and feel the weight of the crowns that once pressed down on mortal brows. Imagine, if you will, the pharaoh's palace as dawn breaks across the desert. Golden sunlight spills through columns shaped like papyrus and lotus, glinting off walls inlaid with turquoise and lapis, and the cool morning air stirs the scent of blossoming gardens. Servants move silently along polished stone floors, carrying trays of figs, honeyed bread, and vessels of wine. The air hums with quiet reverence, for every gesture, every offering, is part of a sacred drama. The pharaoh, after all, is not merely a ruler, he is a living god. Yet beneath the shimmer of luxury, another reality waits, trembling beneath the surface. You might picture a life of endless indulgence, banquets overflowing with roasted waterfowl, musicians plucking lyres by moonlight, and hunting barges gliding through my reeds. And yes, the pleasures were many. But what price came with such privilege? Every moment of the pharaoh's day was scripted by unseen hands, priests, tradition, the unyielding expectations of the gods themselves. No whim, no desire, could ever truly be private. The pharaoh's own heartbeat was measured against the cosmic balance known as Ma'at, the order that held the world together. If he faltered, would the Nile cease to rise? Would the sun forget to return? Imagine the pressure, the loneliness, of being both king and keystone for an entire universe. Even something as simple as washing in the morning was an act charged with meaning. Sacred water, drawn from my own depths, was poured over the pharaoh's skin to cleanse not just his body, but his soul. The priest would shave his head, anoint him with rare perfumes, and paint his face with kohl and ochre, transforming flesh into a vessel worthy of divinity. Every jewel, every golden collar, was a sign to his people and the gods that he was not like other men. Do you ever wonder what it would feel like to wear such a mask, day after day? To never let it slip, to never step away from the gaze of eternity. And yet, for all the perfumes and silks, for all the orchestrated pageantry, the pharaoh's life was a kind of prison, one lined with alabaster and gold, yes, but a cage all the same. Every hour was accounted for. Morning petitions from high officials, midday journeys to inspect colossal building projects, afternoons spent in council or ritual, evenings filled with feasts where even laughter was measured. Every gesture had to display strength, wisdom, and serenity. To falter, to show doubt or weakness, was to risk unraveling the fragile spell that held Egypt together. Can you feel the tension behind the grandeur, the shadow that clings to the edge of the torchlight? Some pharaohs, intoxicated by their own myth, tried to transcend even these limits. They demanded monuments that would dwarf the imagination of any who came after. Look to Khufu, who over 4,000 years ago commanded a vast army of laborers to erect the Great Pyramid of Giza. Imagine the thunder of thousands of feet, the scrape of stone on stone, as blocks heavier than oxen were dragged across the desert. All for a tomb, a single point on the horizon meant to pierce eternity. Over 2 million blocks, each one placed with uncanny precision, rising almost 500 feet into the sky. For nearly 4 millennia, no human structure would surpass it. Do you feel awe at this achievement, or something else? Did the pharaoh's power elevate him, or did it demand too much? The men and women who built the pyramid lived lives of hardship, their backs bent, their bones marked by the toll of relentless labor. They were not slaves, as many now imagine, but conscripted workers, peasants and artisans called to serve for months or years, leaving their families behind. In the burial grounds near the pyramid, their skeletons still tell stories of arthritis, fractured limbs, and the silent cost of glory. The sunlight that dazzles off the pyramid's white capstone cannot erase the shadows in its foundation. As centuries passed, the appetite for such grand tombs faded, yet the hunger for excess endured. When you think of King Tutankhamun, what comes to mind? His radiant golden mask, perhaps, or the endless treasures packed into his tiny tomb. Tutankhamun died young, a mere boy swallowed by the currents of palace intrigue. But when his burial chamber was finally breached by Howard Carter in 1922, the world gasped. Room after room, overflowing with over 5,000 objects, golden shrines, alabaster jars, chariots, elaborate beds, perfumes, even jars of wine and baskets of fruit to nourish him in the afterlife. Imagine standing there, your lantern flickering, the scent of ancient resin thick in the air, and seeing gold piled higher than a man's head. Yet, what does such splendor mean, if you see it through the eyes of a river that has watched generations come and go? For every pharaoh wrapped in gold, tens of thousands of ordinary Egyptians were buried in the sand, their only companions a handful of clay pots or wooden amulets. The chasm between royalty and the common folk was as vast as the desert itself, and the deadliest excesses of power reached even further. In the earliest days, some kings demanded that their closest servants and officials be sacrificed and buried alongside them. Retainer sacrifice, it was called. In the royal necropolis at Abydos, archaeologists have found the skeletal remains of courtiers, servants, and even loyal dogs. Their lives ended so that they might continue serving their master in death. Can you imagine such devotion or such terror? How absolute must a ruler's command be to reach beyond the grave? Thankfully, that chilling tradition faded as the old kingdom dawned. But the impulse behind it, the need to control, to be obeyed without question, to guarantee one's comfort in eternity, never truly disappeared. As mummification grew ever more sophisticated, as the Valley of the Kings filled with secret tombs, the gulf between the pharaoh's afterlife and the meager graves of his subjects only widened. The rich might rest in gilded coffins, swathed in fine linen, surrounded by models of servants and boats for their journey beyond. The poor may do with a shallow pit, and perhaps a single necklace or clay jar, if they were lucky. And so the tombs of the elite became irresistible targets for thieves, who slipped through the darkness to steal what the living and the dead both coveted. Yet even the greatest of pharaohs could not always secure the immortality they craved. Take Ramses II, known as Ramses the Great, the mightiest king of the New Kingdom, who ruled an astonishing 66 years. Under his command, Egypt's armies swept across Nubia, Libya, and far into the Levant. He built temples and statues so grand that his name echoed across continents. But his victory in life did not guarantee peace in death. Over the centuries, Ramses's mummy was moved again and again, hidden from robbers, disturbed by priests, examined by archaeologists. When at last it was unwrapped by Gaston Maspero in the late 19th century, the body was battered and broken, pieces missing, a gaping wound in his skull, a silent record of ancient violence. Even so, the sight of his aquiline nose and strong jaw inspired awe. Today, his remains rest on display in Cairo, far from the hidden tomb where he once hoped to dream undisturbed. So what is it, do you think, that draws us back again and again to these ancient rulers? Is it the marvel of their achievements, or the horror of their excess? The pharaohs stood at the crossroads of heaven and earth, commanding armies and shaping the fate of a civilization, yet always haunted by mortality, by the knowledge that even a god-king can be brought low by time, betrayal, or decay. We see in them the best and worst of ourselves, the yearning for greatness, the fear of oblivion, the hunger for meaning that no amount of treasure can satisfy. Gaze with me into the shimmer of memory and ask yourself, if you held such power, would you use it for wonder or for terror? Would you build monuments to outlast the ages? Or would you be consumed by the need to control, to be remembered, to cheat death itself? These are questions that still echo through my waters, questions that each generation must answer in its own way. The pharaohs, for all their divinity, were prisoners of a system that demanded perfection, spectacle, and ceaseless labor. Their lives were a paradox, a dazzling display of gold and ritual, masking a deep, inescapable vulnerability. They lived at the summit of human achievement, but their shadows stretched long across the land. Can you sense that same tension in our world today, between the urge to reach higher and the dangers that come with unchecked power? Perhaps the true legacy of the pharaohs lies not in their monuments or treasures, but in the endless fascination they awaken in us. The mystery, the duality, the mingled awe and unease, the lure of a civilization both alien and familiar, lost and yet vividly alive in our collective imagination. Every artifact unearthed, every mummy unwrapped, every faded papyrus read, is another ripple in a story with no true ending. The deeper we dig, the more captivated we become, chasing after secrets just out of reach. What does our obsession reveal? Not about them, but about us. So I invite you to linger a moment longer on these questions. What do the pharaohs' lives, with all their beauty and brutality, tell us about the nature of power, of mortality, of the dreams that drive us to greatness, and the fears that haunt us in the dark? These are riddles that the sands of Egypt have never stopped whispering, and that I, the Nile, will carry as long as I flow. Now, as the sun rises higher and the palace stirs to life, let us slip inside the walls and witness the Pharaoh's day begin. Imagine the faint splash of water in an ornate limestone washroom, the hush of sandals on cool stone, and a small army of attendants poised to serve their living god. The rituals and intrigues of daily rule await. Step with me into the heart of Egypt's most secret chambers. I am the Nile, awakening the world with a gentle mist rising from my waters, shrouding the Pharaoh's palace in coolness before the relentless heat arrives. You, standing on the banks, can almost smell the lingering dew and the distant sweetness of lotus blossoms. Within those palace walls, the Pharaoh stirs, attended by shadows and whispers, ready to step into another day of divine routine and mortal peril. His morning begins not as yours does, but as a sacred performance. Servants glide silently down corridors of polished stone, their bare feet muffled by thick rush mats. In the heart of the palace, the limestone washroom gleams beneath shafts of filtered sunlight, casting shifting patterns across the floor. Waiting in expectant silence, a small army of attendants is poised for the arrival of their living god. They bear linen towels so soft they barely seem to touch flesh, and vessels of water perfumed with floating lotus petals. The scent drifts through the air, mingling with the cool notes of natron salt. The Pharaoh is led in with reverence, his every movement watched and mirrored by the kneeling servants. As he steps into the copper tub, the surface of the water ripples, reflecting a cloud of blue and white flowers that swirl around his body. Natron, pale and gritty, is massaged over his skin with practiced care, drawing impurities from his flesh, as if stripping away the dust of mortality itself. Special attention is paid to his hands and feet, those instruments of power that must remain pure for the rituals ahead. Once bathed, the Pharaoh is lifted from the tub and wrapped in linen, the fabric whispering as it slides across his skin. Another servant approaches, holding a tray of precious oils, amber, frankincense, cinnamon, and myrrh. Thick and golden, they are anointed in slow ritual circles from crown to heel, their fragrance curling into the air like invisible offerings to unseen spirits. Each touch is both a blessing and a shield, believed to cloak the Pharaoh in magical protection against the lurking forces of chaos and misfortune. Then comes the delicate application of black kohl around the eyes, a gesture that is both practical and sacred. The dark lines not only ward off the fierce glare of Ra, the sun god, but serve as an amulet against infection and evil. As you watch, you can feel the transformation taking place, flesh and bone becoming something more, something almost otherworldly. Now the regalia awaits, each piece heavy with centuries of meaning. The double crown, red and white woven together, is more than a symbol. It is the living proof of Egypt unified under a single will. A servant, his hands trembling with awe, raises the headdress of gold and lapis lazuli high above his head, lowering it so carefully that not a single strand of hair dares shift. Across the king's shoulders are laid the crook and flail, their polished surfaces catching the dawn light. The crook, gentle and curved, marks him as shepherd of his people, a guide and protector. The flail, sharp and unyielding, is a warning to all who would threaten the delicate order he must maintain. You can almost hear the hush that falls as the Pharaoh, now fully adorned, emerges at last from his private chambers. He is a vision of splendor, radiating both awe and unease, a man transformed into a god, yet still undeniably mortal beneath the layers of ritual and regalia. Every eye in the palace turns to him, some in devotion, others in silent calculation. Yet, this was only the prelude. With the rising sun, the Pharaoh's real work begins, a relentless cycle of duties that leave little time for rest or reflection. His first act is always for the gods. Led by high priests, he moves through echoing halls towards the heart of the temple, where only the most sacred may tread. Massive doors open onto the inner sanctum, a chamber thick with the scent of burning incense and the flicker of golden lamplight. Here sits the statue of the chief god, Amun, Horus, or Ra, silent, inscrutable, and hungry for devotion. The pharaoh bows low, pressing his forehead to the cool stone floor, reciting prayers in a low, rhythmic chant that seems to vibrate through the very bones of the temple. He offers trays of food, vats of wine, bolts of linen, and gleaming jewelry, gifts meant not just for the gods, but for the continued prosperity of Egypt itself. In this moment, he is both supplicant and sovereign, asking for favor while reaffirming his own divine right to rule. You can feel the weight of expectation pressing down with every gesture. The people believe that the pharaoh's piety literally sustains the world. If he falters, the Nile's floodwaters might fail, the sun could hide, and chaos would devour order. It is a burden that few could bear, yet it is one he cannot ever set aside. When the incense smoke finally thins and the prayers are done, the pharaoh turns to the pressing business of the kingdom. Power flows outward from the audience chamber, where the king sits enthroned in gold, flanked by towering statues of Horus the falcon and Wajit the cobra, guardians of kingship. The scene is painted in vivid colors all around him, depictions of the pharaoh smiting foreign enemies, presenting gifts to the gods, surrounded by symbols of victory and divine favor. Before him, the queen sits in silent support, her presence both ornamental and essential, for she bears the promise of the next generation. The vizier, chief among all officials, kneels at the king's feet, awaiting instruction. He is the spider at the center of Egypt's web of bureaucracy, commanding legions of scribes, tax collectors, and magistrates who keep the pulse of the nation steady. Messengers arrive in a steady procession, bearing news from the farthest corners of the kingdom. Some bring warnings, raiders at the border, rumors of unrest, a village struck by drought needing royal intervention. Others bring tribute, the spoils of foreign envoys hoping to win favor or secure trade. Each report is heard, weighed, and judged. The pharaoh's word is law, and his judgments ripple outward, changing the fates of thousands with a single nod. Yet, for all his power, the pharaoh is always surrounded by tension. Every advisor, every wife, every son or daughter is both ally and potential rival. In the hush of the court, glances flicker like the movement of eels beneath the surface, hinting at ambitions that could boil over at any moment. The aura of endless ceremony cannot fully mask the constant gnawing threat of betrayal. Even moments of leisure are soaked in symbolism and scrutiny. When the pharaoh rides out into the desert on a chariot, bow in hand, he is not simply hunting for sport. Each arrow loosed at a lion or antelope is a demonstration of his strength, a reminder to all that he commands not just people, but the wild forces of nature itself. These scenes are immortalized on temple walls, reinforcing the myth of the king as the tireless conqueror. During grand festivals, the pharaoh's divinity is put on parade. The Opet festival, for example, sees him riding in a gilded bark down my own waters, accompanied by colossal statues of the gods. Crowds throng my banks, the air alive with music and chanting, as the king is celebrated as the linchpin connecting heaven and earth. For a few hours, all of Egypt seems to pulse with joy and reverence. But beneath the jubilation, the pressure on the pharaoh never lifts. At day's end, the king withdraws to the inner sanctum of his palace, the private quarters where the public mass can slip, if only slightly. Here, surrounded by luxurious tapestries and the murmur of fountains, he may seek solace in the company of his great royal wife, or perhaps among the many secondary wives and favored concubines who dwell in the harem. This secluded world is fragrant with perfumes and the soft laughter of women, but it is also a crucible of rivalry and ambition. Children run through shaded courtyards, some with the haughty bearing of those who know their blood is divine. The pharaoh's virility is measured by the size of his brood, dozens of sons and daughters, each a potential pawn or threat in the game of succession. For these women, the stakes are impossibly high. The queen must produce a son to secure her place. The concubines, no matter how pampered, live under the constant shadow of being cast aside if they fail to bear royal offspring. Every embrace, every whispered promise is tinged with calculation. But even in these intimate moments, the line between the sacred and the profane is blurred. The pharaoh's unions are not merely personal pleasures. They are reenactments of cosmic creation, believed to maintain the divine balance that keeps Egypt safe. The king is expected to perform as vigorously in the bedroom as in the council hall or on the battlefield. The pressure to father an heir is relentless, and failure is not just a private disappointment, but a public threat to the very fabric of order. As night drapes the palace in velvet darkness, the pharaoh finally allows himself to drift towards sleep. Yet peace is elusive. Behind the thick walls and guarded doors, the air hums with secrets. Rivalries among wives simmer, each vying for their son's claim to the throne. The story of Ramses II's household is legendary. His beloved Nefertari, famed for her beauty and political acumen, locked in a bitter contest with Nefret, a secondary consort who would stop at nothing to see her own son crowned prince. One night, word spreads that Nefertari's tomb has been desecrated. Her image chiseled away from the walls in a calculated attempt to erase her from history. Whispers point to Nefret, though nothing can be proven. In the end, it is her son who inherits the throne, proof that even the favored can fall prey to the shadows lurking within the palace. And darker still are those rare, unsettling tales of incest that stain the royal family line. Convinced that divine blood must remain untarnished, some pharaohs choose their own sisters, or even daughters, as wives. The story of Akhenaten, the heretic king, chills even the most hardened soul. He shatters tradition by naming his daughter Ankhesenamun as queen, an act immortalized in intimate carvings that still cling to the ruins of Amarna. The images are shockingly tender, their closeness almost defiant. For Ankhesenamun, there was no choice, only duty. She bears her father's children, but none survive to claim the legacy he sought to create. When Akhenaten dies, the old gods sweep back in. His city is abandoned, his name struck from the records. Ankhesenamun disappears, her fate lost in the sands. Her story a haunting reminder of the cost of obsession and the human toll beneath the mask of divinity. For all their splendor, the pharaohs are bound by chains of expectation, haunted by the need to maintain order and prove themselves worthy of the gods. Their lives are dazzling and disturbing, a ceaseless cycle of ritual, power, and betrayal. The palace walls may gleam in the sunlight, but within, shadows twist and coil, waiting for a moment of weakness. And as I, the Nile, flow past their monuments and tombs, I remember it all. I have watched each pharaoh rise in glory and fall into darkness, their ambitions echoing in the current, their secrets swallowed by the waters. Their daily rituals were meant to carve out immortality, to hold chaos at bay for one more day. But even the mightiest king cannot escape the passage of time, or the hungry silence that waits beyond. As you reflect on the grandeur and the burdens of these god-kings, consider what drove them to such lengths: the desire for immortality, the terror of oblivion, the endless struggle to leave a mark on the world that would outlast their fragile flesh. And so, as the torches in the palace flicker low, and the pharaoh finally closes his eyes, another thought stirs on the horizon. For even as he lived each day in the shadow of the gods, his greatest obsession always lay ahead: the quest to conquer death itself. From the moment they took the throne, every pharaoh was already planning for the moment they would leave it and ascend to join the gods in the eternal afterlife. You drift with me now, alongside the ancient banks, where time folds in on itself, and the sun blazes white across the desert. I have watched the pharaohs since their first footsteps echoed on my shores. From the instant they wrapped themselves in the shimmering linen of kingship, their thoughts turned not to life, but to the afterlife. The pursuit of immortality became their true obsession, and none chased it with more relentless ambition than Khufu, the architect of the Great Pyramid. Imagine Khufu, his eyes narrowed beneath the ceremonial crown, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the desert meets the sky. He was not content to follow in the footsteps of his father, Sneferu, who had already astonished Egypt with the bent and red pyramids. Khufu wanted something greater, something eternal. He dreamed of a monument so vast that it would defy time itself, a structure that would outshine every dynasty's achievements and cement his godhood forever. So, under the relentless sun around 2550 BC, the work began. Layer upon layer, block upon block, the Great Pyramid rose from the desert floor, a mountain forged by human hands. Picture it, 2.3 million limestone blocks, each quarried, hauled, and set with astonishing precision. The pyramid soared 481 feet into the glowing sky, its gleaming white limestone casing reflecting the sun so fiercely that it must have seemed like a beacon for the gods themselves. Even now, thousands of years later, nothing built by human hands rivals its sheer scale. But to Khufu, this was not just a tomb. No, this was a resurrection machine, a carefully engineered vessel meant to bridge the gap between mortal and divine. Every angle, every passage, was calculated to channel the power of Ra, the sun god, and to carry Khufu's soul upward on beams of golden light. The pyramid's design dripped with sacred intent. Its polished flanks mirrored the cycle of day and night, life and death. And deep within, in the pyramid's silent heart, a maze of narrow shafts and corridors led to the king's burial chamber, a space so sacred that even the air inside seemed to tremble with anticipation. Step inside that chamber with me. Massive granite blocks line the walls, their surfaces so perfectly joined that not even a grain of sand could slip between them. Here, Khufu's mummified form would rest in a granite sarcophagus, his body surrounded by treasures, food, and sacred texts inscribed with spells from the pyramid texts, the oldest sacred writings in Egypt. This was no mere grave. It was a launch pad for the soul, a place where the divine and the mortal met in a hush of stone and shadow. Of course, building a monument on this scale demanded more than ambition. It devoured resources and lives. The legend of slaves dragging stones under the lash is a myth. I have heard whispered along my banks, but the truth is more complicated. Most of the builders were not slaves at all, but paid laborers, ordinary villagers and farmers recruited when my waters rose each year and flooded their fields. During the inundation, when daily life paused, they answered the call of the king, trading sickle for chisel and plough for lever. Still, don't mistake their labor for easy work. Under the pitiless sun, they hauled stone blocks along ramps, their hands blistered, backs bent, sweat stinging their eyes. Overseers barked orders, driving the workers onward with promises of bread, beer, and a share in the king's glory. Accidents were common, and death was never far away. Some workers, those who died on duty, were buried in modest tombs at the pyramid's edge, a quiet testament to the human cost of one man's quest for immortality. At the heart of this massive operation stood Hemiunu, Khufu's cousin and royal architect. Imagine him, standing on a rise, his linen kilt dusted with grit, surveying the organized chaos below. He directed thousands, his every command carrying the weight of the pharaoh's divine mandate. For Hemiunu and his army of foremen, failure was not an option. The king's eternal soul depended on their speed and precision. Every block set, every angle measured, was a step closer to eternity. For Khufu, the pyramid was more than a monument. It was a stairway to the stars, a symbol of his identity as a living god. He imagined his spirit soaring among the imperishable stars in the northern sky, his name carried forward by generations yet unborn. And in that, Khufu was not wrong. Here we are, more than 4,500 years later, still awestruck by the scale and ambition of his creation. But as I have seen time and again, the hunger for immortality is never easily satisfied. Even Khufu's Great Pyramid could not halt the slow decline that crept over Egypt as the Old Kingdom waned. Later pharaohs, gripped by anxiety over their own mortality, poured ever-dwindling fortunes into increasingly elaborate tombs and mortuary temples. Their fear of death twisted into obsession, driving them to ever darker extremes in their effort to secure a place among the gods. This desperation led to one of the most chilling practices I have ever witnessed in my long passage through time: retainer sacrifice. Imagine the silence of a royal tomb, broken only by the shuffling feet of those led to their deaths, not for crime or betrayal, but to serve their king in the afterlife. In the tomb of Pharaoh Djir at Abydos, archaeologists uncovered the remains of 318 men, women, and even children, all sacrificed and laid to rest in careful rows beside their sovereign's enclosure. The magnitude of this act is staggering, the largest mass sacrifice known in Egyptian history. These were not anonymous victims, but palace servants and members of the royal household, chosen to accompany their master beyond the grave. Some were buried with their own names inscribed on their coffins, a haunting reminder that each had a life and story before being swept up in the king's terrible need for immortality. The method of their deaths, likely strangulation or a sharp blow, was swift and ruthless. Their bodies were hastily embalmed, their graves furnished with little more than the barest essentials. To the pharaoh and his priests, this was the natural order. The king's power extended beyond death, commanding loyalty and service into eternity. The victim's sacrifice was deemed a sacred honor, their deaths transformed into a ritual necessity for the king's eternal well-being. Yet, I remember the fear that hung heavy in the air, the desperate glances exchanged among those chosen. Beneath the polished stone and sacred words, the reality was one of terror and resignation. Thankfully, this macabre practice faded by the end of the Old Kingdom, but its shadow lingers, a stark reminder of the lengths to which mortals will go when gripped by the promise of eternal life. The idea of ruling forever, of being transformed from flesh and bone into a god among the stars, was so powerful that it justified even the darkest acts. As you drift with me, let yourself reflect on this legacy, the dazzling splendor of the pyramids, the unsettling sacrifices buried in their shadow, and the hunger for immortality that shaped a civilization. What echoes from these ancient stones still call to you today? Yet, Egypt's story does not end here. The tides of time would soon bring new faces to the throne, foreigners who would rule as pharaohs, weaving their fates into the tapestry of Egypt's enduring legend. As the centuries passed, ancient Egypt's New Kingdom period gave way to the Late Period, a time of foreign invasions and rule by outside powers. I have watched Egypt's tides ebb and surge across centuries, felt the footprints of conquerors and the weight of dynasties on my banks. By the time the Old Kingdom's glory had faded, I'd already seen so many rise and fall. Libyans, Nubians, Assyrians, Persians. Each one tried to claim the mantle of Pharaoh, but none reshaped Egypt's spirit, quite like the Greeks who followed Alexander the Great. When Alexander swept in from the north in 332 BC, wresting Egypt from Persian hands, the land trembled with anticipation. I remember the day he stood in Memphis, crowned as Pharaoh, a foreigner draped in borrowed divinity, the sun glinting off his armor as he gazed out at my waters. It was here that he founded Alexandria, a city of marble and learning, its white colonnades rising from the Mediterranean mist. Alexandria soon became the beating heart of the Greek world, a city where the voices of philosophers mingled with the prayers of priests, and where my own flow carried whispers from every corner of the earth. But Alexander's reign as pharaoh was as fleeting as the morning mist. His sudden death in 323 BC left Egypt swirling in uncertainty. From that chaos, a new power emerged. Ptolemy, one of Alexander's trusted generals. He seized Egypt for himself, and I watched as he crowned himself pharaoh, founding a dynasty that would rule for nearly 3 centuries. The Ptolemies, as they came to be known, were a strange, dazzling fusion of Greek and Egyptian traditions, foreigners draping themselves in the ancient rites of my land. To win the devotion of their Egyptian subjects, these new rulers adopted my oldest rituals. They wore the double crown, broke bread with the priests, and walked the temple corridors in sacred processions. Ptolemy II, Philadelphus, son of the first Ptolemy, even commanded the worship of the deified Alexander, weaving the Macedonian conqueror into the tapestry of Egypt's gods. You can almost picture the golden statues, the incense curling upwards, as priests chanted in both Greek and Egyptian, the air thick with a mingling of old and new. Yet beneath these displays, the Ptolemies never forgot their Greek roots. They clung to their own language and customs, even as they married their siblings in the style of ancient Egyptian royalty. Their children bore Greek names, and their architects reshaped Alexandria with grand colonnades and marble towers that seemed to belong more to Athens than Thebes. The city itself glistened, a mosaic of cultures, a place where the old gods lingered in the shadow of new philosophies. Their ambition was boundless. One of their boldest undertakings was the construction of the Pharaohs lighthouse, a beacon of such brilliance that its light could be seen for miles across the darkened waters. Ordered by Ptolemy. Isota, the lighthouse soared over 300 feet above the harbor, guiding ships safely through the night. I remember how its fire reflected on my waves, a man-made star beside the eternal stars above. The Ptolemies also built grand temples in my honor, and in the name of the old gods, temples like Edfu for Horus and Philae for Isis, each one inscribed with hieroglyphs and Greek letters side by side. The stones themselves seemed to speak in 2 tongues, echoing the dual nature of their creators. But it was not just their buildings that set the Ptolemies apart. Their court was a theater of intrigue, their family tree tangled with ambition and betrayal. Among their queens, one stands out, a woman whose story flickers between legend and fact, Berenice II, wife of Ptolemy III Euergetes. When her husband left for war, Berenice made a desperate vow to Aphrodite. If he returned safely, she would cut off her long, shimmering hair as an offering. True to her word, she placed her locks in the goddess's temple. But then, the hair vanished. Whispers spread through the palace and city streets, everyone wondering what had become of the queen's sacrifice. It was the court astronomer, Conon of Samos, who spun the tale that soothed and enchanted. He declared that Aphrodite had placed Berenice's hair in the night sky as a constellation. Even now, Coma Berenice's glimmers above the Nile, a reminder of love, loss, and invention. Yet behind the shimmering facade, the Ptolemaic dynasty was riddled with scandals and violence. Power was an intoxicating wine, and the taste often turned bitter. After Ptolemy IV's death in 2004 BC, his young son Ptolemy V was thrust onto the throne, a child not yet 6 years old. The kingdom's real power fell to his regents, Agathocles and Ctesibius, who were unwilling to yield their influence. Their ambition led them to a horrifying act. They ordered the murder of the young king's mother, Queen Arsinoe, eliminating anyone who stood in their way. Word of the crime spread quickly. The people of Alexandria, who had loved their queen, erupted in fury. They surged through the palace gates, dragged the regents and their families into the streets, and exacted a brutal vengeance. The echoes of their screams, the chaos of that day, still ripple in my memory. This was no divine justice, but the raw human rage that can topple even those who claim to be gods. The Ptolemies, for all their claims of divinity, could not hide their humanity. Their reign was a time of both dazzling achievement and profound vulnerability. They patronized the arts and sciences, turning Alexandria into a haven for scholars and dreamers. In the Great Library, the Egyptian priest Manetho compiled his monumental Egyptiaca, now mostly lost to time, but once the first true chronicle of Egypt's pharaohs, dividing history into 30 dynasties. The very way we remember Egypt's past is shaped by the work done under their rule. And within the halls of the library, mysterious texts flourished. One papyrus, the so-called dream book, penned by a priest from Sebennytos, held some 200 dreams and their meanings. Some were harmless. Dreaming of eating figs might mean you would come into money, but others cast a shadow. Dreaming of being burned alive, a chilling omen of danger ahead. These lost works, filled with secrets and warnings, still whisper to those who seek them. But no Ptolemy captured the imagination like their last and most famous queen, Cleopatra VII. Her name still stirs something deep within you, doesn't it? She was more than a symbol of beauty or seduction. Cleopatra was a ruler of extraordinary intellect and ambition. She spoke many languages, commanded armies, and navigated the treacherous waters of Roman politics with dazzling skill. Yet her story is also one of heartbreak and defeat. Caught in the lethal struggle between Mark Antony and Octavian, Cleopatra chose the losing side. As Roman legions closed in, she ended her own life, the legend says, by the bite of an asp. Her death marked the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty, and with it, the twilight of the divine pharaohs. The last echoes of their god-kings faded as Egypt became a province of Rome. Yet the legacy of the pharaohs could not be erased. Their monuments still rise from my banks. Their treasures glint in the desert sun, and their stories live on in every inscription and crumbling papyrus. The pharaohs, whether born in Egypt or in foreign lands, built a civilization that continues to capture your imagination, even after thousands of years. Their lives straddled an impossible line, the threshold between gods and mortals, splendor and brutality, hope and despair. They achieved dazzling heights, but their flaws and fears made them as human as any soul who walks my shores. So as you gaze upon the ruins, or trace their stories in ancient texts, I invite you to reflect, what is it about the pharaohs that still calls to you across the centuries? Is it their power, their mystery, or the fragile humanity behind the mask of divinity? In their triumphs and tragedies, you may glimpse something of yourself, a longing for greatness, a fear of oblivion, a thirst for meaning that time cannot wash away. And now, if you follow my current a little further, I'll show you how the daily life of a pharaoh unfolded, how every morning brought both privilege and the weight of sacred duties. Listen closely, for I am the Nile, ever-flowing and ancient, witness to every secret dawn and every shadowed dusk in the lives of Egypt's pharaohs. Imagine yourself gliding with me, cool mist on your skin, as the palace stirs before sunrise. The first golden rays slip across columns and courtyards, and within those walls, the pharaoh's world begins in a hush of reverence and ritual. His awakening is not a simple act of rising from sleep. Servants move silently through dim corridors, their footsteps muffled by woven reeds. The scent of lotus and frankincense drifts on the air as they prepare basins with water drawn from my own currents. Even this water is sacred. Every droplet carries my memory, my promise of fertility and life. And now it becomes a tool for cleansing a living God. Before the pharaoh's eyes open, priests stand ready, reciting invocations under their breath. The air is thick with anticipation. His first sensation is the cool touch of water poured gently over his head, a ritual washing meant to purify not just his body, but his spirit. The priest's words flutter around him, ancient spells woven to shield him from evil. and bestow the blessings of the gods. He is not alone as he dresses. Attendants lay fine linens over his skin, each fold pressed with care. They fasten broad collars inlaid with turquoise, lapis, and gold, stones chosen not only for beauty, but for their magical protections. The double crown, white for Upper Egypt, red for Lower, waits to be placed upon his brow. This is not mere ornament. When the crown settles atop his head, it is as if the weight of the land itself presses down. You can almost feel it, a heavy, silent reminder of his bond to every field, every village, every beating heart along my banks. Yet, even here, in these intimate moments, there is an undercurrent of fear, a sense that the pharaoh must do everything, just so, or risk the balance of the world. Every cosmetic stroke is a shield, each ring an amulet, a whispered plea for protection. The palace is alive with superstition, every gesture a thread in the vast tapestry of divine order. When he finally steps into the sunlight, the pharaoh glimmers with opulence. His breakfast is simple compared to the banquets that await him later. Figs, honey cakes, bread warm from the ovens, and sweet beer. But even this meal is laced with ceremony. Priests murmur blessings over his food and drink, for danger can come in many forms: poison, curses, or the silent envy of those around him. Now, the day's true work begins. As Horus made flesh, he must intercede between man and gods. Temple doors open with a creak that echoes like thunder. Within sacred halls, the pharaoh pours libations of wine and milk, offers incense and food to painted effigies, and chants prayers older than memory itself. The priests watch every movement, noting the precision of his gestures, the strength of his voice. The rituals are not empty. They are believed to hold Egypt together, to keep my waters flowing, to ensure the sun's daily return. You can sense the tension beneath this grandeur. If his performance falters, if the gods sense hesitation or impurity, famine or disaster might follow. The entire country waits on the outcome of his prayers. Every villager, every farmer who tills the mud along my banks, depends on this daily communion. But the pharaoh's day is far from over. From the temple, he returns to his palace for the business of ruling an empire. Advisors gather in a circle of polished stone, their eyes sharp, voices soft and measured. The air inside the audience chamber hums with strategy, concern, and ambition. Here the pharaoh settles disputes, decrees new laws, and listens to petitions brought by trembling messengers. Trade agreements are discussed. Taxes are set. Judgment is rendered, sometimes with a word, sometimes with a gesture that seals a man's fate forever. His authority is absolute, his word as immutable as the flood and the drought. Yet, beneath the gilded certainty, there is always risk. The law must maintain ma'at, the fragile balance of order and chaos. One misstep, one favor granted to the wrong courtier, and the equilibrium could shatter. There are moments of respite, but even these are carefully orchestrated. If you follow the pharaoh through palace gates and out into the marshes, you see him ride in a gilded chariot, bow in hand. The reeds hiss as birds take flight. His archers and attendants trail behind in a respectful silence, watching as he draws the string and lets arrows fly. Sometimes he hunts wild cattle or hippos, acts that are both royal sport and ritual domination over nature. Pharaohs like Amenhotep II took pride in their strength, showing off their prowess before foreign dignitaries. Their victories are immortalized in temple carvings, each kill another sign that the gods favor Egypt's king. The air is thick with the smell of river mud and crushed papyrus, the cries of animals mixing with triumphant shouts. But even in triumph, the pharaoh cannot quite forget the dangers that haunt his every step. After the hunt comes the banquet, where the halls resound with music and laughter. Servants pour wine into golden cups. Platters overflow with roasted duck and honey-glazed fruits, and dancers spin by torchlight. Foreign princes and local nobles trade polite smiles, but beneath the masks of civility, old rivalries and fresh resentments simmer. No matter how lavish the feast, the pharaoh's gaze is never far from those who serve him. Food tasters sample every dish. Trusted guards watch the doors. It is a world of glittering surfaces, but beneath it, suspicion and fear run deep. Even laughter can be edged with menace. As the evening deepens, the pharaoh retires to his private quarters. But the rituals do not cease when the crowds disperse. His bedchamber is guarded by men sworn to die in his service. Amulets dangle from the headboard, and priests have drawn protective symbols on the walls with ochre and myrrh. The very air seems to shimmer with invisible power, a shield against curses, spirits, and human foes alike. Yet for all these protections, the pharaoh is only human, and never is he more vulnerable than in sleep. Night after night, he dreams of omens, strange visions of snakes, storms, or the faces of ancestors. He awakens sometimes with a start, sweat beading on his brow despite the cool desert air. The priests are summoned to interpret these dreams, to reassure him that the gods remain on his side. But doubt is a shadow that never entirely disappears. If you look past the marble and gold, you find a man beset on all sides. Court politics swirl like eddies in my current. The royal family is a tangle of alliances and grudges. The chief queen sits in her painted chamber, aware that her favor can be fleeting, a position always at risk. Beyond her, a host of lesser wives and foreign concubines, each one a pawn in some wider game, gifts from distant kings, bargaining chips in treaties, or bearers of potential heirs. Maintaining the purity of the royal bloodline is a constant obsession. The pharaoh is expected to marry sisters, sometimes even daughters, to keep the divine spark undiluted. To outsiders, this practice is shocking, but here it is seen as holy, a duty, not a choice. The gods themselves are said to have set this pattern, their own unions mirrored in the royal house. Yet, as centuries pass, the consequences grow harder to ignore. You, as the river, have seen the children born twisted or frail, their bodies marked by the choices of their ancestors. The tombs hold evidence, brittle bones, misshapen skulls, the legacy of too much closeness. Inside the palace, tension is constant. Brothers eye each other with suspicion, knowing that only one can inherit the crown. Uncles and cousins hold secret councils in shaded gardens. Servants whisper in corners, their words carried through corridors like a breeze off my surface. Any sign of weakness, a faltering voice, a missed ritual, a careless word at court, might invite disaster. Some threats are subtle, woven into the very fabric of palace life. Spells scrawled on scraps of papyrus, hidden beneath a rival's chair. Perfumes laced with toxins. A glance exchanged across the banquet table that means more than any spoken insult. Others are far more direct. Assassins slip through the shadows, and sometimes the pharaoh's own advisors conspire against him. The history of my shores is littered with the stories of those who fell. Pharaohs murdered by ambitious family members, undone by treacherous viziers, or struck down by illnesses that no magic could cure. You might remember the mysterious end of Tutankhamun, his death still whispered about in the halls of power. Was it a curse? A poison? Or simply the inevitable outcome of a dynasty collapsing under its own weight? Even those who rule well are not immune. The pharaoh's every action is scrutinized. Any failure to maintain Ma'at, the sacred balance, can turn the people's awe into suspicion. If my waters fail to rise, if famine strikes, the crowd outside the palace grows restless. The divine king, who was once adored, can, in an instant, become a scapegoat. To guard against these dangers, the pharaoh surrounds himself with layers of protection. Amulets are sewn into his garments. Priests perform endless rituals to bind hostile spirits. Trusted guards are rewarded with gold and land, their loyalty purchased day by day. But all this is never quite enough. The sense of threat is ever present, gnawing at the edges of even the most magnificent ceremony. For every moment of glory there is a moment of dread. For every banquet, a whispered plot. The Pharaoh's life is a paradox, a world of unimaginable luxury and splendor, and yet a cage forged from tradition, expectation, and fear. The weight of the crown is more than gold. It is the burden of being more than a man, yet never truly free from the weaknesses of flesh. And still, the cycle endures. Each pharaoh, drawn by the promise of immortality, steps into the same gilded trap, hoping to outshine those who came before. The monuments rise higher, the feasts grow more extravagant, and the rituals more elaborate. Yet the shadows lengthen, always lurking just beyond the torchlight. Now, as the moon bathes the palace in silver, and the pharaoh settles beneath embroidered linen, you might wonder, was all this splendor worth the price? Were the gods ever truly satisfied? Their names live on, carved in my banks and whispered by generations. But their fears and failings are just as enduring. Let yourself imagine it and reflect. How much power would you dare to wield, knowing the cost? How much luxury would you trade for peace of mind? The lives of the pharaohs are gone, but their paradox remains. A legacy is troubled as it is triumphant. But even the mightiest pharaoh was still mortal, and the spectre of death loomed large over the royal court. As the sun sets and the shadows deepen, our journey through opulence and intrigue flows inevitably onward into the mysteries of death, the afterlife, and the eternal legacy that the pharaohs sought to claim. Death was the one certainty that even the most powerful pharaoh could not escape. As I, the Nile, have carried their barges and reflected their monuments in my waters, I have witnessed the shadow of mortality haunting the gilded halls of every royal court. To live as a pharaoh was to rule as a god on earth. But the Egyptians believed that this divinity was only truly realized in the afterlife. They imagined a world beyond death, where the pharaoh would join the gods in a paradise, untouched by famine, pain, or decay. Yet, reaching this eternal realm wasn't a matter of faith alone. It was a task that demanded extraordinary preparation, relentless vigilance, and, at times, disturbing sacrifice. This obsession with immortality pulsed through every stone of the pyramids that still rise above my banks. These colossal tombs were never mere displays of wealth or power. They were carefully engineered vessels, machines of eternity, intended to propel a single soul skyward and secure the pharaoh's place among the stars. When you stand in the shadow of the Great Pyramid, or let your mind drift to the golden sands of Saqqara, you're not just gazing at ancient architecture. You're staring at the physical embodiment of a belief so powerful that it moved mountains and shaped the destiny of a civilization. The journey into eternity began long before the last breath was drawn. From the very first moments of a new reign, preparations for death pressed close behind every coronation. The moment a pharaoh accepted the double crown, craftsmen, architects, and priests set to work on plans for his tomb and the mortuary temple that would honor his memory. Some of these projects would take decades, outlasting wars, droughts, and dynastic intrigue. The pharaoh himself would walk through unfinished corridors, tracing his own passage into the afterlife. He would choose the sacred site, dictate the alignment to the celestial bodies, and select the hieroglyphs and painted gods that would guide his soul through the perils awaiting beyond the grave. Yet, a tomb without treasures was as useless as a bark without a rudder. So, the accumulation of grave goods became a lifelong pursuit. Furniture carved from cedar, gold bracelets that caught the sun, chests overflowing with linen and fine oils. All of these were gathered not just for status, but as vital supplies for the journey ahead. Even food and wine were stockpiled in sealed jars, each one intended to feed the pharaoh's ka, that ghostly double who would wander hungry in the dark if neglected. Each item, no matter how mundane, was infused with ritual significance, transformed into a talisman against oblivion. But above all, it was the body that had to be preserved, protected from the rot and chaos that threatened to unravel the pharaoh's claim to eternity. This is where the art and the horror of mummification entered the story. The process itself was a delicate, sacred performance that could stretch on for up to 70 days. In secret, far from the eyes of the common people, embalmers chosen from a special priesthood began their work. I have watched their funerary barges drift across my waters at dusk, the air thick with incense and whispered prayers. First, the body was ritually purified, anointed, and washed. Then, the embalmers made their quiet incisions, removing the lungs, liver, stomach, and intestines, each organ treated with care, wrapped and placed in canopic jars, adorned with the heads of protective spirits. The heart, believed to be the seat of wisdom and memory, was often left inside, ready to be weighed in the halls of judgment. The brain, in a particularly unsettling twist, was usually discarded, extracted with hooks through the nostril, and considered unnecessary for life beyond death. Next came the drying, a slow, relentless process in which the flesh was packed with natron, a natural salt that drew every drop of moisture from the corpse. For weeks the body lay in silence, as the desert heat and the power of natron rendered it incorruptible. When the embalmers were satisfied, they wrapped the withered form in endless strips of fine linen, layer upon layer, each one embroidered with spells and amulets against evil. The completed mummy was transformed, not into a cadaver, but into a vessel, a divine chrysalis meant to rise again. The spectacle did not end there. The mummy was then placed inside nested coffins, each more extravagant than the last. The outermost might be hammered from solid gold, inlaid with lapis lazuli and turquoise, a face mask gazing serenely into eternity. Scenes of gods and monsters, hymns for protection, and curses for trespassers covered every surface. These coffins were not just containers, they were shields, inscribed with spells to ward off every danger the pharaoh might encounter on his journey. On the day of burial, the procession wound its way to the tomb, a river of mourners, priests, and musicians, all moving in solemn rhythm. I remember the sound of their drums echoing at dawn, the wailing of professional mourners, and the shimmering of gold as treasures were carried into the darkness. The pharaoh's body, sealed in its final nest of coffins, was lowered into the hidden burial chamber, surrounded by the accumulated wealth of an empire. The tomb itself was a world in miniature. Walls blazed with color, telling stories of triumph and hope, maps of the Duat, the underworld, where serpents and spirits lurked in endless night. Chests of grain, jars of honey, bouquets of lotus flowers, and even chariots were placed at the pharaoh's side. Every offering, every carving, was a spell against the silence of death. But for the pharaohs, even these grand measures were never enough. Their fear of death and the desire to control fate pushed them to ever greater extremes. Some became obsessed with their tombs, pouring unimaginable resources into monuments like the Great Pyramid of Giza. Built for Khufu around 2550 BC, this structure soared over 480 feet and was woven from more than 2 million limestone blocks. For nearly 4,000 years, it was the tallest human-made structure on Earth. Imagine the sight: thousands of laborers hauling stone, overseers shouting beneath the sun, and priests chanting as each block found its place. The logistics were staggering. Every slab quarried, ferried across my waters, then dragged over sand and up dizzying ramps. Yet Khufu's pyramid was more than an engineering marvel. It was a cosmic machine, aligned with the stars, shafts pointed toward Orion and Sirius, the celestial homes of Osiris and Isis. Deep within, Khufu's granite sarcophagus waited, surrounded by treasures and guarded by secret passages and deadly traps, meant to defeat even the most determined tomb robbers. Despite all these precautions, the obsession with immortality faced a relentless enemy: human greed. The lure of gold and sacred relics drew thieves to break through stone and darkness, shattering the sanctity of the pharaoh's eternal home. Even Tutankhamun, whose tomb was discovered nearly intact in 1922, had suffered the touch of ancient robbers not once, but twice, before our modern eyes ever found him. The pharaoh's quest to rule forever was matched, step for step, by those willing to risk everything for a taste of forbidden treasure. Yet the most chilling aspect of these preparations was the belief that the pharaoh's journey required not just riches, but living company. In the oldest tombs, my waters remember the bloody price of devotion: servants, courtiers, and even beloved animals sacrificed to serve their king beyond the grave. The first dynasty pharaoh, Jer at Abydos, was entombed with more than 300 souls, men, women, even children, many showing signs of violence. Their stories ended so that one man might not walk alone into eternity. This practice of human sacrifice did not vanish overnight. Centuries later, the tomb of Amenemhat III at Hawara held the remains of 5 young women, offered as companions, along with a strange menagerie of animals: a monkey, a dog, ducks, all laid to rest beside their ruler. And in the 18th dynasty, the tomb of Amenhotep II revealed something even more unsettling. Tens of thousands of human hair wigs, harvested from young girls and women, preserved so that the pharaoh could retain his youth and power forever in the next world. Each lock of hair was a promise, a physical anchor to the lost dream of immortality. These practices, both wondrous and horrifying, reveal just how deeply the pharaohs believed in their own divinity, and how far they were willing to go to escape the reach of death. The afterlife was no distant hope. It was a destination planned down to the last detail, a prize worth any sacrifice. But nothing in my long memory remains unchanged. Time moved on, and so did the customs of the living and the dead. By the time the new kingdom dawned, the slaughter of servants had faded into myth. Symbolic offerings took their place: ushabti figurines, small statues carved to serve the pharaoh in the afterlife, ready to spring to life at a word. The grandeur of the tombs, too, began to wane as Egypt's fortunes faltered. The last of the great pyramid builders was Amenemhat III. As the centuries flowed onward, the scale of royal tombs shrank, their secrets hidden deeper underground, their glory fading into legend. So, as you contemplate these tombs and the silent mummies within them, let your mind wander back over the river of time. What drove such desperate devotion to immortality? What does it mean to leave a legacy carved in stone, yet haunted by sacrifice and loss? The answers linger in the cool shadows of the pyramids, and in the eternal flow of my waters. As we've seen, the lives of the pharaohs were a complex tapestry woven from the threads of divine power, mortal excess, and an unshakable fixation on the afterlife. In the next chapter, we'll step beyond the monuments and into the tangled stories of 3 of Egypt's most legendary rulers: Ramses II, Akhenaten, and Tutankhamun, whose legacies continue to fascinate and disturb us to this day. If you listen closely, you can hear me, the Nile, ancient and eternal, whispering the secrets of those who once ruled at the limits of mortal ambition and divine claim. My waters have cradled the rise and fall of pharaohs, and I remember each one, not just as distant legends, but as living beings who dreamed, struggled, and left their mark upon my banks. Let me carry you now through the haunting stories of these 3 rulers who shaped Egypt's destiny: Ramses II, Akhenaten, and Tutankhamun. Each one believed they could outpace death itself, yet none could escape the duality that binds kings and beggars alike. Picture Ramses II, stepping into the world beneath a blazing sun, born, so it is remembered, around 1303 BC. Even as a child, He was wrapped in the trappings of destiny, his every movement watched, weighed, and measured by priests, scribes, and courtiers who whispered of greatness. When he seized the throne as the third pharaoh of the 19th dynasty, he did so with a certainty carved from stone. For 66 years, Ramses ruled with a hand as steady as the flow of my waters, fathering over 100 children and scattering his likeness across the length of Egypt. From the first day, Ramses was obsessed not just with ruling, but with being remembered. His ambitions rose higher than the sun itself. He did not simply build temples. He commanded entire cities into existence. His capital, Pi-Ramses, flourished in the Nile Delta, a shimmering jewel of palaces, lush gardens, and streets lined with towering statues, each one bearing his face, each one whispering his name. As you wander those ancient avenues in your mind, imagine the scent of lotus blossoms drifting from the pools, the laughter of children echoing off walls of imported cedar, and the ever-present gaze of Ramses, immortalized in granite. But ambition has its price, and Ramses paid it with the sweat and lives of those who toiled beneath the desert sun. His vision demanded armies of laborers, slaves, prisoners, and conscripted peasants, whose backs bent beneath the weight of stone and the heat of relentless sky. Their hands shaped the monuments that would outlast their own names, and their suffering was swallowed up by the promise of Ramses's eternal glory. Even now, when you stand in the shadow of Abu Simbel, or gaze up at the forest of columns in Karnak's great hypostyle hall, you cannot help but feel both awe and unease. The grandeur is undeniable, but so is the cost. Ramses's hunger for immortality left no room for rivals, not even in memory. He chiseled his name over those of earlier kings, carving his legacy deeper with every stroke. To him, only one god could walk the earth, and that god was Ramses himself. His victories at Kadesh became legend, his treaties inscribed upon temple walls. His image multiplied until it seemed the whole land might buckle under the weight of his self-made divinity. Yet, for all this, the Nile remembers the man behind the mask, a father, a ruler, and a mortal, whose body, mummified and gilded, could never truly escape the reach of time. But not all pharaohs managed to bend Egypt so completely to their will. The story of Akhenaten, the so-called heretic king, is a tale of vision, isolation, and erasure. Born as Amenhotep IV, he came to the throne during the 18th dynasty, a time when tradition wrapped itself around Egypt like linen on a mummy. Akhenaten shattered that tradition with a single radical idea. There would be only one god, the Aten, whose essence was the radiant disk of the sun. His devotion consumed him. Akhenaten built a new city, Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten, rising from the desert as a place of light, free from the shadows of the old gods. He changed his name, his titles, and even the art that depicted him. No longer would pharaohs stand rigid and unchanging in stone. Instead, Akhenaten appeared in a strangely human form, elongated, soft, almost otherworldly. He embraced his queen, Nefertiti, and his daughters, in scenes filled with affection and sunlight, a shocking intimacy for a god-king. Yet, in his zeal, Akhenaten isolated himself from the priests, the people, and the centuries-old rhythms that had bound Egypt together like the current binds my shores. The temples of Amun fell silent, their gold and incense fading to dust. The high priests, stripped of power, simmered in the shadows, and the people murmured about famine and neglect. Even as Akhenaten exalted the Aten, his own world narrowed, shrinking to a sunlit bubble cut off from Egypt's heart. When Akhenaten died, his religious revolution crumbled almost overnight. His city was abandoned to the desert winds. His name was chiseled out of history, his monuments smashed and repurposed for other kings. The Nile remembers how quickly reverence can turn to silence, and how a king's singular vision can be both a beacon and a curse. Akhenaten's devotion did not win him immortality, but obscurity. Still, his story endures, a haunting echo of what happens when one man dares to rewrite the world's ancient script. Then, there is Tutankhamun, the boy king whose golden mask has become the very face of Egypt for people far from my banks. Tutankhamun was born into a world already fractured by his father Akhenaten's religious upheavals. His bloodline was tangled, his father likely Akhenaten himself, and his mother perhaps Akhenaten's own sister. In the royal houses of Egypt, the desire to keep the bloodline pure meant marriages that ignored the warnings of nature. And for Tutankhamun, this legacy was written in his very bones. He ascended the throne as a child, no more than 9 years old, his body frail and his kingdom fragile. Imagine that first day, a boy dwarfed by the throne, his small hands gripping scepters far too heavy, his eyes wide with uncertainty, as the viziers and generals watched. His own body betrayed him, marked by a cleft palate, a clubbed foot, and a curved spine. He walked with a cane, each step a struggle, and even simple movements brought pain. Yet, the world expected him to be a god. In his brief reign, Tutankhamun's advisors, especially the Vizier Ai and the General Horemheb, moved quickly to erase Akhenaten's legacy and restore the old gods. The temples reopened, the priests returned, and the country tried to stitch itself back together. While the boy king's voice may have been soft, his actions, guided by those around him, helped heal Egypt's wounds, at least for a time. But Tutankhamun was never meant for long life. Around the age of 19, he died suddenly, perhaps from an infection that followed a broken leg, perhaps from any number of ailments that plagued his fragile frame. His death was as quiet as his life. No grand battles, no sweeping reforms, no towering monuments to rival Ramses. Yet the story did not end there. The discovery of his unplundered tomb, thousands of years later, sent a shockwave around the world. The glow of gold, the intricate treasures, and the haunting beauty of his death mask made Tutankhamun the most famous pharaoh of all. His tomb became a portal, opening a window into the ordinary and extraordinary realities of ancient Egypt. In the silence of his burial chamber, the line between god and child, king and victim, became heartbreakingly thin. As you drift with me through these stories, can you feel the paradox? Ramses II, a living god, immortalized through sheer will and stone, but also a man who could not escape death's touch. Akhenaten, a visionary who reached for the sun itself, but whose legacy was almost erased from the earth. Tutankhamun, a child king whose body bore the scars of his family's ambitions, yet whose memory outshone all others because his tomb remained hidden, untouched, and miraculous. Their lives were filled with splendor and shadow, triumph and tragedy. They built monuments that still draw the world's gaze, but they also live with the same doubts and fears that ripple through all of us. Their stories remind us that every claim to divinity is haunted by the certainty of mortality, and every dream of immortality carries the seeds of oblivion. So, as you walk with me along the banks of memory, pause for a moment. Let the sunlight glinting on water remind you of gold in a burial chamber, but also of tears shed for lost children and vanished dreams. The pharaohs were not just distant gods, but men and women who loved, feared, and hoped. Their greatest achievements were often matched by their most disturbing obsessions, their cruelty woven into the same tapestry as their beauty. Do you see yourself in their longing for meaning? Can you sense, across the centuries, the same thirst for purpose that lives in your own heart? As you reflect on the grandeur and the darkness, the monuments and the wounds, remember, what endures is not just the stone and gold, but the stories, the questions, the very human yearning that flows through every one of us. Through all these ages, I, the Nile, have watched them come and go. Their names echo in the wind, their faces carved in stone, their hopes and fears sunk deep into my silt. They have taught me, and now you, that the measure of a life is not found only in splendor or power, but in the fragile, persistent spark of humanity that survives even the sands of time. As we drift onward together, let us not forget that these kings and queens were as tangled as the reeds at my edge, divine and mortal, exalted and broken. Their stories are our inheritance, and their paradoxes our own. Now, as we delve deeper into the shadowy world of the Pharaohs, we must also acknowledge the intricate web of royal relationships and rivalries that shape their lives and legacies. The currents grow darker, the stories more entangled, and together we will uncover the secrets that lie beneath the surface of divine kingship. Let me draw you close, as the river that has silently witnessed every secret, every scandal, and every whispered betrayal beneath the veils of Egypt's royal palaces. Flow with me through the shadowy halls and sunlit courtyards, where the gilded serenity of the Pharaoh's world was nothing but a shimmering surface stretched tightly over the tangled roots of the royal family. Here, beneath the marble and gold, webs of loyalty, jealousy, and ambition were woven tighter than the reeds along my banks. And though the world saw only the dazzling mask of divinity, I have always known the truth that simmered beneath. Within those palace walls, the royal family resembled a living tapestry, each thread pulling against the others with the weight of love, rivalry, and the desperate will to survive. At the very heart of this living web was the pharaoh himself, a figure both adored and feared, surrounded by his queens, concubines, and a brood of children whose fates were written in shifting sands. His chief queen, often called the Great Royal Wife, held a place of undeniable power. If she bore a son, her influence could rival that of any vizier or high priest. Should the pharaoh die before his chosen heir was ready, she might even rule as regent, her word carrying the same weight as the king's. I remember the time of Hatshepsut, whose ambition flowed as steadily as my waters. After her husband Thutmose II passed into the afterlife, she stepped beyond the expected role of queen and assumed the full regalia of a pharaoh, donning the false beard and double crown, striding through the temple colonnades as Egypt's living Horus. Her reign was bold, sometimes controversial, and her claim to power unsettled many, yet she ruled with a vision that left monuments and trade routes blossoming along my shores. But if the chief queen sat atop the royal hierarchy, she was never alone. The palace overflowed with lesser wives and concubines, each one carefully chosen, some the daughters of noble families, others foreign princesses, sent as tokens of peace or bargaining chips in distant courts. Every night, the air in the women's quarters vibrated with rumors and schemes. Each woman vied for the pharaoh's attention, hoping to gift him with a son and secure her own future in a world where favor could vanish as quickly as the morning mist. In this atmosphere of constant competition, alliances formed and dissolved like eddies in my current. Servants carried secrets between silken chambers. The wrong whisper at the wrong moment could mean disgrace, or worse. It was a world where even children were pawns in games they could scarcely understand. Sometimes, the most disturbing truths took root in these gilded halls, the practice of royal incest. Pharaohs, believed to be living gods, were expected to preserve the purity of their bloodline. To the Egyptian mind, only another royal, another vessel of divinity, could produce a legitimate heir. Sisters married brothers, half siblings were wed, and on rare occasions, even daughters became wives to their own fathers. The intention was to keep the divine spark burning bright, but such unions often bore bitter fruit. Some royal children bore the visible marks of generations of inbreeding, their health sacrificed on the altar of tradition. Yet not every sibling pair became husband and wife. Some rivalries were as fierce as the desert sun. The story of Ramses III's court still ripples through my memory. His secondary wife, Tia, was more than a mere consort. She was a schemer with ambitions for her own son, Pentuer. When it became clear that Ramses IV, the designated crown prince, stood in Pentuer's way, Ta and her conspirators wove a deadly plot. Ancient records, pressed into fragile papyrus, tell of a harem conspiracy so chilling that its echoes can still be felt. With poison and cunning, they tried to seize the throne, but their plans unraveled. Trials were held, convictions handed down, and executions carried out. The royal harem, intended as a sanctuary of pleasure and power, became a stage for betrayal and bloodshed. Cleopatra, too, walked this knife's edge. As the last of the Ptolemaic dynasty, she knew that kinship was both shield and sword. To secure her crown, she did not hesitate to remove her own younger sister, Arsinoe IV, from the board. Her death, a warning to all in the royal family. Love was often indistinguishable from danger. The streets of Alexandria trembled with rumors, but the river remembers the truth. Every crown in Egypt was bought with a price, sometimes paid in a sister's blood. Still, even in these gilded cages, moments of tenderness could bloom. Ramses II, who ruled longer than any before him, honored his chief queen, Nefertari, with a tomb of staggering beauty. Its walls are painted with scenes of love and reverence, the hieroglyphs, a song of devotion echoing through the centuries. He even built the great temple of Abu Simbel, its colossal statues gazing eternally across my southern reaches, a monument not only to his own glory, but to the woman he cherished. Even Akhenaten, the heretic king who turned Egypt's gods upside down, found refuge in his family. On the painted walls of Amarna, he appears not as a distant deity, but as a husband and father, his arms wrapped around Queen Nefertiti and their daughters. In these rare glimpses, the divine mask slips, and we see not a god-king, but a man seeking comfort in those he loved. Do you feel the tension? This was the paradox at the heart of pharaonic life, a royal family that could be both nurturing and nightmarish, a source of strength or the spark of disaster. Every royal child was born into a world of possibility and peril, where the favor of the pharaoh could elevate or destroy. The very blood that bound them together became the reason for betrayals that could shake the kingdom to its core. The family tree of the pharaohs twisted in ways even I, the eternal river, found difficult to follow. Its branches bore fruit, both magnificent and monstrous. Within the palace, he could never be certain whether a gentle touch was an act of love or the opening move in a deadly game. Consider this as you walk with me deeper into their world. The pharaoh's divinity was not simply a matter of birthright or ritual. It was a living force that shaped every bond, every rivalry, every desperate grasp at power. In the eyes of the people, the pharaoh was no mere mortal. He was Horus made flesh. A living god descended from the sky, and the axis upon which all Egypt turned. From the moment the pharaoh donned the double crown, he ceased to be fully human. His voice was the voice of the gods. His words shaped the fate of nations. In the temples, his every movement was watched by priests and scribes. His actions believed to maintain the balance of Ma'at, the cosmic order that kept chaos at bay. You could see this belief written into the very stones of Egypt's temples. Places like Karnak and Luxor, vast as cities themselves, pulsed with sacred energy. Within those walls, the pharaoh performed ceremonies not only for the gods, but as a god. He made offerings, spoke incantations, enacted rituals that echoed through the pillars and out across the land. At dawn, he joined Ra, the sun god, in a ritual of rebirth, ensuring that light would return to Egypt each day. This was not just pageantry. It was believed to keep the very fabric of the world from unraveling. The pharaoh's divinity stretched beyond the sacred. It shaped every law, every command, every gesture. To defy the pharaoh was to defy the gods themselves. No council or priest could overrule him, and his subjects trembled before his presence. Even the highest officials kept their eyes lowered, speaking only when spoken to, lest they invite his wrath. Some pharaohs reveled in this power. Akhenaten, for example, used his authority to sweep away the old gods, declaring the sun disk, Aten, as the one true deity. By his will alone, temples were shuttered, statues chiseled smooth, and the capital itself uprooted and replanted in the sands at Akhenaten. For a brief, dazzling moment, Akhenaten stood at the center of a new universe, one he had dreamed into being by sheer force of will. When his reign ended, the gods he had banished returned, but his audacity remains etched in memory. Yet, for all their godlike stature, pharaohs remained deeply, painfully human. They loved, feared, and grieved. They could be generous or cruel, visionary or paranoid. Their isolation, enforced by divinity, set them apart from all others. Even their closest kin tiptoed around them, wary of crossing unseen lines. The palace, for all its splendor, was a place of loneliness, where trust was as rare as rain in the desert. This is the duality that haunts the pharaoh's legacy, a world where unimaginable privilege existed, side by side with unending peril. Their every triumph was shadowed by the risk of betrayal. Their every claim to immortality was threatened by the frailties of flesh and blood. So, as you marvel at the grandeur of their monuments and the beauty of their art, remember that every triumph was built upon the shifting sands of family loyalty and ambition. The Nile, eternal and watchful, has seen it all: divinity and downfall, tenderness and treachery, life and death intertwined. Now, as our journey turns from the tangled lives of the living to the silent mysteries of the dead, follow me into the darkness beyond the palace gates. The flickering torchlight casts an eerie glow on the rough-hewed walls of the tomb, as if the very shadows are alive with the weight of ages past. Here, the pharaoh's obsession with death and immortality awaits, a world where the line between God and mortal blurs forever. Listen, and let me draw you down, through stone and shadow, into the heart of the earth, deeper than the sun-baked banks, where I, the Nile, flow bright and open. In the suffocating dark, the air presses close, thick with incense and the heavy perfume of decay, clinging to your skin and throat, until every breath tastes of ancient secrets. Torchlight flickers and dances on rough walls painted with the dreams and terrors of kings. You step softly, your footsteps echoing in silence that has waited centuries. This is the underworld of the Pharaohs, and I have borne witness to every soul who has crossed its threshold. Death, for the Pharaohs, was not a final curtain, but the opening of a grander stage. Life on my green banks was only an overture to the endless symphony beyond. Here, the end was not feared, but anticipated. A brilliant transformation, a journey into fields of eternal light, where gods held feasts and laughter never faded. Yet, to earn this paradise, every detail had to be mastered. No ruler could risk a single misstep on the road to forever. So, from the first day they claimed the double crown, each pharaoh began to prepare for death with a dedication that bordered on obsession. Imagine the scale. Entire cities rising from the desert, not for the living, but for the dead. Tombs and mortuary temples spread across the landscape like silent armies, each one a fortress against oblivion. The most famous of all, of course, are the pyramids of Giza, those impossible mountains of stone that have watched my waters for millennia. They are more than tombs. They are cosmic machines, built to propel a king's spirit into the sky, aligning his fate with the stars themselves. The very shape of the pyramid, sloping and smooth, was no accident. It echoed the first mound that emerged from my primordial depths at the dawn of creation. Every angle, every block set by sunburnt hands, was aligned to the cardinal points as if to anchor the pharaoh's soul within the order of the universe. Stand beneath those stones and feel the weight of eternity pressing down, a silent promise and a threat. Yet all this grandeur was only the beginning. Far more urgent was the fate of the body itself. The Egyptians believed the soul needed its earthly vessel to survive. Spirit and flesh must be preserved together, tightly bound, or else the journey would fail. And so, the living king became the architect of his own immortality. Picture the sacred ritual of mummification, the slow, deliberate process that could last 70 days. The king's body, once so powerful, is now silent, laid out on a wooden table, while priests work in the dim, resin-scented light. Natron's salt draws every drop of moisture from flesh and bone, shrinking and hardening the skin. The organs are removed: heart, lungs, liver, stomach, intestines, each one carefully wrapped and sealed in canopic jars, guarded by spirits carved in alabaster. The priests move with reverence, muttering spells, their hands glistening with sacred oils. The body is anointed, perfumed, then wrapped in linen bandages, layer upon layer, hundreds of yards until the king is cocooned, transformed from mortal man into a vessel of eternity. Over the linen, they place amulets, scarabs, ankhs, tiny gold falcons, each one a charm against the terrors of the afterlife. And finally, the face is covered with a golden mask, hammered and polished until it gleams like the first sunrise. The mask is not just a portrait, but an ideal, a vision of the king as he wished to be remembered, flawless, serene, and forever young. But the journey does not end with the mummy's completion. The pharaoh's body is carried in solemn procession, surrounded by priests whose voices shiver through the corridors, chanting hymns and spells to shield him from demons and darkness. The sarcophagus is lowered into the burial chamber with a hush that feels almost holy. Around it, the tomb fills with treasures, the work of a lifetime, gathered for eternity. There are beds and thrones, glittering jewelry, goblets of gold, fine linen robes, and baskets overflowing with bread and figs and jars of honeyed wine. All that the king might want is there, waiting for him to claim it on the far side of death. Yet, beneath this pageantry, another, darker truth seethes. For some pharaohs, objects were not enough. They craved the company of the living, even in death. And so, the tombs were peopled not just with statues and treasures, but with the bodies of loyal servants, men and women chosen to follow their king into the afterlife. Human sacrifice, in the earliest dynasties, was a grim reality. Imagine the silent fear in the eyes of an attendant as the tomb doors closed. Archaeologists have uncovered rows upon rows of subsidiary graves, clustered around the burial chambers of kings like Jer and Hor. In the desert at Abydos, the tomb of King Jer revealed a chilling sight: over 300 bodies, laid out in careful order. Some were young, some old, men and women alike, all sacrificed to serve their master forever. The marks of strangulation and blunt trauma still whisper their stories, even now. But the horror did not end with humans. The pharaoh's obsession with companionship in the afterlife took stranger forms. Hundreds, sometimes thousands, of animals were killed and mummified. Beloved dogs, cats, monkeys, even lions. Each one wrapped in linen and sealed in resin, adorned with tiny collars or golden charms. These loyal creatures were meant to guard and entertain the king on his eternal journey, a final act of devotion that bound flesh and spirit together in darkness. Some tombs held even stranger treasures. Hair, cut from the heads of courtiers and slaves, was woven into elaborate wigs, sometimes filling entire storerooms with their silent, tangled masses. The Egyptians believed hair contained magical power, that a king with a full, luxurious mane would never lose his vitality. So, in death, he was surrounded by the very essence of youth and strength, borrowed from those who had served him in life. Over the centuries, the most shocking rituals faded. By the New Kingdom, human sacrifice was seen as barbaric, a relic of a more brutal age. Instead, the Egyptians fashioned tiny figurines called shabtis, carved from wood or faience, meant to spring to life and serve the pharaoh in the next world. These little servants, hundreds in each tomb, promised that the king would never want for labor, yet spared the living from the fate of earlier generations. Still, even as the physical sacrifices vanished, the psychological grip of death never loosened. The pharaoh's need for immortality siphoned massive wealth and labor from the living. Whole villages worked for decades, not to build homes or harvest grain, but to craft wonders for the dead. The king's desire for eternal rule cast a long, cold shadow over his people, a reminder that his power reached beyond the grave. And in the end, for all their cunning and effort, the pharaohs could not escape the slow, patient hand of time. Most tombs were broken open, looted, their treasures scattered or melted down, their mummies unwrapped and cast aside. The golden masks were torn away. The names of kings that once echoed through my valleys faded into silence. The very acts meant to secure their immortality became invitations to destruction, as if the universe itself delighted in humbling those who dared to defy its order. Yet, for all their failures, the pharaohs remain with us. Their faces, preserved in gold and resin, stare out with uncanny vitality. Their stories haunt the world's imagination, tales of curses and treasures, of glittering afterlives and bone-deep dread. When you peer into the shadows of a tomb, when you see the painted eyes staring from the darkness, you feel the ancient shiver of awe and repulsion, the strange allure of those who tried to conquer death. For the pharaohs, death was only the beginning, a passage into a realm of endless promise, won at a terrible price. Generations of laborers toiled, and countless lives were given so that a single king could dream of eternity. And yet, the greatest irony is that even these god-kings, for all their might, could not command the future. Their monuments crumble and their names are lost, even as their legends grow. As you rise from the cold corridors of the tomb, blinking in the dazzling sun that glitters on my surface, you may feel a strange vertigo, a sense of dislocation at the chasm that separates your world from theirs. Yet, listen to your heart, and you might feel a faint echo of kinship. The struggle against death, the longing for meaning and memory, these are not just the obsessions of dead kings, but of every soul who has ever lived beside me. Consider for a moment, what tombs do you build? What treasures do you gather in your own quest to outlast the sands of time? We may not command armies or raise pyramids, but in our hopes and fears, in the marks we leave behind, we are all architects of our own kind of immortality. So, as the shadows of the pharaohs recede and my waters carry you back toward the present, take a moment to reflect on the enduring power of their story. Their greatest legacy is not the gold or granite, but the simple, haunting truth that we still speak their names, still wonder at their dreams and dreads, thousands of years after their bodies were laid to rest. In memory and myth, they achieved the immortality they craved. Let us honor them, not only for their glory, but for the unsettling questions they force us to ask about our own place in the cycle of life and death. Their names ripple through my current, and through yours, whenever you gaze into the mysteries of the past. As we move forward, remember, the story of the pharaohs does not end with their tombs. The pharaohs of ancient Egypt lived lives of luxury, power, and religious devotion unparalleled in the ancient world. You drift now with me, the Nile, where I have watched every pharaoh's triumph and terror ripple along my banks. I have borne their golden barges, heard their whispered prayers, and felt the shadow of their obsessions as the sun set behind their monuments. Across centuries, I've seen the dazzling spectacle and the secret dread that colored the lives of Egypt's divine kings and queens. So come closer, and let me carry you through the final mysteries of their lives, their deaths, and the legacy they left shimmering in the sands. Step into the palace halls where the air is thick with incense and ambition. The pharaohs, cloaked in linen and crowned with gold, walked in a world apart from ordinary mortals. Their every wish was law, their every breath a symbol of the god's will. Yet, even as they feasted and commanded, a single truth haunted their footsteps. Even the ruler who claims eternity must one day meet the end. That is the paradox that wound itself around every pharaoh's heart. They wielded absolute power, claiming to be the living embodiment of Horus, or the beloved child of Ra. Yet, the flickering oil lamps in their private chambers could never fully chase away the fear of what waited beyond life's curtain. I have watched them build temples and shrines, praying that devotion might buy them passage to a paradise they imagined just beyond my reach. This obsession with the afterlife was not mere superstition. It shaped their days, their nights, and the sweat of thousands who toiled to make the pharaoh's immortality possible. The ancient Egyptians believed the soul would live on, but only if the body was preserved and the proper rites performed. They pictured an afterlife, where the pharaoh would stroll through sunlit fields, hunt along green shores, and rule once more, but only if every detail was perfect. So began the great work. Mummification, an art honed over generations, became the key to eternity. Picture the silent chambers where embalmers, their hands powdered with natron, carefully removed organs and dried the royal flesh. The body was cleansed, anointed with scented oils, then wrapped in linen as soft as river reeds. This ritual was not merely practical, it was sacred. Each layer spoke of hope, fear, and the desperate wish to outwit death itself. But the preservation of flesh was only the beginning. The pharaoh would need more than a body to carry into the next world. My banks have seen endless processions of treasures. Chests of lapis, thrones inlaid with ivory, jars of honey and wine, carried into tombs by sweating laborers. These grave goods, shimmering in torchlight, were meant to furnish the pharaoh's eternal home. Among these treasures, you find the famous golden mask of Tutankhamun, its face eternal, its eyes forever open to the secrets of the underworld. And what of the tombs themselves? The pharaohs poured their ambition and anxiety into stone. I have watched the pyramids rise on my horizon, their shapes cutting into the sky as if to wound the heavens. Later, I saw the pharaohs turn away from the open plain, carving their tombs into the secret heart of the mountains in the Valley of the Kings. These winding corridors, painted with spells and stories, were designed to baffle thieves and shelter the king's soul. Yet, the lust for security was sometimes matched by a darker hunger. Some pharaohs resorted to chilling extremes to guarantee their afterlife was as splendid as their earthly reign. When King Jer of the First Dynasty died, his tomb became the resting place for over 300 men and women, their lives sacrificed to serve him in eternity. I remember their silent procession, the air heavy with incense and dread, the echo of drums and ritual cries fading into the earth. Human sacrifice, however, would not last forever. By the time the new kingdom dawned, such grim practices had faded, replaced by new obsessions. Pharaoh Amenhotep II, uncomfortable with letting go of mortal vanities, was buried with countless wigs crafted from human hair. Ramses II, the great builder, took with him his beloved pet cat, a companion for all ages. Even in death, the pharaohs clung to their luxuries, unwilling to relinquish the comforts that marked them as both gods and men. But no wall is impenetrable, no lock unbreakable. For centuries, tomb raiders crept through the darkness, chisels in hand, drawn by the promise of gold and forgotten secrets. Most royal tombs were plundered. Only luck and obscurity saved Tutankhamun's resting place, preserving a world of wonders for awestruck eyes thousands of years later. Even so, the lengths to which pharaohs went to defend their immortality still astonish and disturb all who wander these silent corridors. Now, in the sterile glow of laboratories, scientists use CT scans and DNA mapping to peel away the final wrappings of royal mummies. Every scan reveals secrets, childhood injuries, diseases, ancient relationships, echoes of lives that once shaped the world. The pharaohs, so desperate to be remembered, have achieved a kind of immortality they never imagined, not as gods in the fields of the blessed, but as mysteries feeding our endless curiosity. Reflect with me as you drift on my current, on the paradox at the heart of every pharaoh's life. They wished to be both mortal and immortal, flesh and divinity, ruler of men and lord of the hereafter. Their tombs and treasures tempt us with the dream of cheating death, even as their bones remind us that no one, not even a god-king, escapes the passage of time. Their names still ring out across millennia. Ramses the Great, his statues towering above my waters, his legend written in every stone, from Luxor to Abu Simbel. For 66 years, he ruled with a will as fierce as the desert wind. His mummy, bold features and hair like fire, has outlasted even the palaces he built. His legacy is not just the monuments, but the great family he left behind, over 100 children, each a branch of the royal tree. Travel back with me to the reign of Akhenaten, who dared to challenge the old gods and raise a single son above all others. With Nefertiti at his side, radiant and enigmatic, he shattered traditions and declared a revolution of faith. Together they built new cities, new temples, and new ways of seeing the divine. Yet when Akhenaten died, his vision was swept away, his name chiseled from monuments. Tutankhamun, his own son, returned Egypt to the old ways and consigned his father to oblivion, at least, until our modern eyes rediscovered him. And then there is Cleopatra, the last to wear the crown I have seen pass from brow to brow. Her story winds through my delta, filled with intrigue, intellect, and irresistible charm. She spoke many tongues, outwitted rivals, and ensnared the hearts of Rome's greatest men. Yet even she could not halt the tide of conquest. When she died, Egypt's ancient line ended, but her legend only grew. Each of these rulers, warrior, innovator, temptress, show us a different face of the pharaoh's paradox. Their lives burst with color and drama, their deaths with ritual and fear. They built not just monuments of stone, but stories that shimmer in the world's imagination. Whenever you hear these names, Ramses, Nefertiti, Akhenaten, Cleopatra, know that their shadows still linger on my surface, caught between sunlight and silt. The world they shaped was one of dazzling achievement and unsettling secrets. For 3,000 years, they ruled over a kingdom that measured time in cycles as endless as my flow. Their pyramids and temples still stand, defying wind and sand, reminders of a longing for eternity that could never be fully sated. Yet, for all their power, they too were bound by the unbreakable thread of mortality. Step inside one of their tombs with me for a moment. The air is cool, heavy with the scent of ancient resins. Hieroglyphs flicker in the glow of your torch, telling stories of battles, festivals, and the journey to the afterlife. In the shadowy corners, gold glimmers, a chair, a necklace, a game board. But the silence is thick with questions. Who loved the pharaoh and who plotted his fall? What dreams haunted him as the embalmers worked by moonlight? What did he truly fear as the final stone sealed his tomb? Modern science has granted us new eyes. DNA testing untangles royal bloodlines, revealing rivalries, alliances, and secrets that even the priests could not have known. Isotope analysis traces the journey of a single bead or scrap of linen across deserts and seas. Each discovery pulls us closer to the real lives behind the myth, the aches of childhood, the scars of battle, the family feuds that shaped a dynasty. Yet, the more we uncover, the more the mystery deepens. What private faiths did the pharaohs whisper as the world slept? Did they believe, in their final moments, that their preparations would succeed? Or did doubt, as cold as the tomb, settle over their hearts. These are questions the river keeps, swirling beneath the surface, inviting you to ponder as the water moves on. In their quest for immortality, the pharaohs achieved more than they could have dreamed. They are no longer simply rulers of a vanished kingdom. They have become archetypes, symbols of power, ambition, beauty, and loss. Their images haunt our screens and pages, their stories retold in every generation, their faces staring back from gold and stone and faded wall paintings. And so, as you return to your own life, remember the lesson the pharaohs have left on my banks. The desire to be remembered, to shape the world and cheat oblivion, lives in all of us. Their triumphs and failures, their brilliance and brutality, are mirrors reflecting the best and worst of what it means to be human. The next time you see a pharaoh's mask, Tutankhamun's serene golden features, or a half-erased name on a crumbling temple wall, pause for a moment. Let your mind wander back to those ancient days and consider the price of immortality. Reflect on the contradictions, king and corpse, god and ghost, splendor and sorrow, all bound together in the tides that still lap at my shores. Thank you for letting me, the Nile, guide you through the lives and afterlives of Egypt's legendary rulers. May their stories linger in your thoughts, as the river's song lingers in the twilight, eternally whispering of glory, fear, and the undying hope to be remembered. The journey is never truly over. The pharaoh's secrets wait, just beneath the surface, forever calling you to look deeper into the mysteries of time.